Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 1, The Overgod of Life. In the skies above the South Sea, Beirut, Blue Fire, and BB were standing off to one side as in the air, a blurry figure slowly solidified. Green robes. Long, jade green hair. Jade green eyes. Her smile seemed to cause the entire universe to tremble. This is the Overgod of Life. Linley stared at the woman who had appeared. The woman who was wearing the crown of life on her head. His heart couldn't help but clench with nervousness. In terms of appearance, Linley had never before seen anyone who was more perfect than the Overgod of Life. In terms of aura, the noble, exalted aura of the Overgod of Life was so prominent and pristine. The Overgod of Life's gaze fell upon Linley. Since the creation of the universe, this is the 7th Overgod mission, and my second time issuing an Overgod mission. Congratulations, Linley Barak, for completing it. The Overgod of Life's voice was very gentle. Not only could it be heard through the ears, it reverberated within his mind as well. According to the rules of the mission, you can now make a request of me. If I am able to accomplish it, I will do so for you. As the sound echoed, Linley completely lost his bearings. What request do you have? The Overgod of Life said. Request. Only now did Linley come to his senses. Beirut and Blue Fire came to their senses as well. They, too, were stunned. Blue Fire, with but a faint smile, the Overgod of Life caused us to lose our bearing. This is too terrifying. Beirut sent mentally. The Overgods truly are supreme. The power of an Overgod artifact is definitely far beyond that of a sovereign artifact. Right. Unfortunately, Linley won't choose an Overgod artifact. Blue Fire secretly sighed as well. Almighty Overgod of Life, my request is to have my Grandpa Douring be brought back to life. Linley raised his head to look at the Overgod of Life as he spoke. Back to life, the Overgod of Life was momentarily silent. Linley's heart grew nervous. I have to succeed. Grandpa Douring has to come back to life. Based on what Linley knew, after someone's soul was dispersed, sovereigns became unable to rescue that person. Only Overgods might have that ability, especially the Overgod of Life. She herself was the personification of the edicts of life, and controlled the lives of the countless living creatures of the countless planes. Forgive me. I am unable to satisfy your request. The Overgod of Life's voice was as calm as ever. Unable. BB instantly stared. Unable. Beirut and Blue Fire were startled as well. Linley's mind went blank. The only thing in it was the words of the Overgod of Life, which echoed repeatedly. Forgive me. I am unable to satisfy your request. Unable to satisfy. Unable to satisfy. Linley's gaze grew sharp, and he stared straight at the Overgod of Life. He said frantically, Overgod of Life, you control the creation and dissipation of the lives of all the creatures of the universe. Why can't you bring someone back to life whose soul has dissipated? He had risked everything to lie to the sovereigns and fight to acquire the Overgod talismans. He had done all these things to bring Grandpa Douring back to life. But the Overgod of Life was unable to do it. Forgive me. I am unable to do this. The Overgod of Life shook her head. But you are an Overgod. Linley called out frantically, his heart filled with unwillingness to accept this. The Overgod of Life said calmly, Linley Barak, according to the rules of the mission, I will satisfy a request of yours. However, this request must be something I can do. The dispersal of one soul symbolizes a true death. This is an unalienable part of the edicts. I am the edicts of life. Naturally, I cannot act in a way that violates the edicts. My very existence is that which allows the edicts to function in the countless planes of the universe. To bring back to life someone whose soul was dispersed is to break the edicts. If I were to break the edicts, then the countless planes of the universe would no longer be bound by the edicts. By then, Without the protection and binding of the edicts, the countless planes would themselves collapse. The Overgod of life said calmly. Linley's face turned white. His eyes were filled with despair. Boss, BB looked towards Linley, his eyes filled with nervousness. So that's how it is. Beirut and Blue Fire exchanged a glance. They couldn't help but shake their heads and sigh. Overgods were seemingly almighty, but in the end, they were the personifications of the edicts. Once a person's soul was shattered and dissipated, they were truly dead. This was part of the edicts. How could the edicts themselves do something which was against the edicts? After all, the responsibility of the four Overgods was to allow the edicts to function normally and without interruption. I expended countless efforts to seize these Overgod talismans, all for that tiny shred of hope. Who would have imagined, that in the end, it was all for nothing? Linley lowered his head. Silently, 2 streams of tears flowed out. Grandpa Douring, the response of the Overgod of life had settled it. Grandpa Douring would never come back again. At most, he would forever exist in Linley's memories. Boss. Don't be too heartbroken. BB said hurriedly. The heavens gave me hope, which allowed me to fight, to work hard, to struggle. But in the end, after I accomplished what I needed to, the heavens smashed that hope that they had given me. Linley laughed with bitterness. Beirut and Blue Fire walked over as well. Linley, don't be too heartbroken. Life, death, sickness, infirmity, these things are far too common. You can't have perfection in all things, just because you desire it. Beirut said consolingly. Where there is life, there shall be death. Life and death are determined by the edicts of the universe. Blue Fire consoled as well. You and I have surpassed life and death and live indefinitely, but if we were to die, our souls would also be dissipated, and we wouldn't be able to come back either. There are many, many people in the world who have lost loved ones. Take a wiser view of things. I understand this principle. Linley took a deep breath, struggling to calm down. If he had known all along that there was no hope, that would have been one thing. Linley would have kept his pain buried deep in his heart. But after finding hope and struggling towards it, only to have that hope destroyed, this was like sprinkling salt onto a wound. It truly was painful. The existence of the universe requires that the restrictions of the edicts be maintained. The Overgod of life said calmly. Even though you have completed the Overgod mission, your request must be in accordance with the restrictions of the edicts. I am unable to fulfill the request you made. Now, Linley Barak. Please change your request. Change my request. Linley was stunned. The successful completion of an Overgod mission means that I must fulfill a request of yours. The Overgod of life said calmly. The earlier request that Linley had made was ineffective, and so naturally he had to be given another one. Boss, hurry up and make a request. BB said frantically. Linley, there is no way to bring your grandpa Douring back to life. For now, I think you had best choose an Overgod artifact. Beirut's eyes were shining, and he hurriedly urged Linley, perhaps, you might have other dreams, but in this universe, many things depend on one's own power. Only with enough power will many things be solvable. Blue Fire said hurriedly as well, it would be best if you chose an Overgod artifact that suited you. An Overgod artifact that will let you release your power to the greatest extent. I understand. Linley nodded. After having experienced so much, Linley knew that only with enough strength would many things be easily accomplished. What sort of Overgod artifact should I request? Many thoughts came to Linley's mind. A defensive Overgod artifact? No, that's not that great an idea. My personal defense is already quite good. In addition, when I use my hands and feet to attack, I'm unable to unleash my full power. Linley was still the most proficient in swordplay. Whether when he using the heavy adamantine sword, Blood Violet, or Mirage. Linley's supreme attacks had all relied on the sword. I will request a sword-shaped Overgod artifact. Linley came to his decision. Linley raised his head to look at the Overgod of life, who stood there in midair. Almighty Overgod of life, I need a weapon-type Overgod artifact. A sword-shaped Overgod artifact. I shall satisfy your request. The Overgod life said calmly, while at the same time, she stretched out her slender right hand. A green sword shadow slowly began to materialize and solidify, and an astonishing, sharp energy began to condense, causing the surrounding space to crack and shatter. An Overgod artifact. Beirut, Blue Fire, and BB all stared. According to the legends, only the Overgods were capable of creating an Overgod artifact. In the past, only the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts and the chief sovereign of light were in possession of an Overgod artifact. This Overgod sword, Linley viewed it carefully. It was a nearly 1.5 meter long green longsword. The guard of the sword was shaped like a flower petal, and the sword's handle had runed etchings in the shape of coiling tendrils that perfectly matched the location where one would grip it. As for the blade of the sword, it was covered with diagrams of all sorts of plants and flowers. Both edges of the sword were extremely sharp. The long sword didn't move, but just by hanging there, it brought the surrounding space to a point of near collapse. This is the life Overgod sword. Only after reaching the sovereign level will you truly be able to withstand the terrifyingly powerful energy within this sword. Only then will you be able to truly bind it. The Overgod of life gently stroked the longsword with her left hand, and instantly, the luster of the longsword immediately retreated, making it seem plain and unadorned. At first glance, it looked just like an ordinary sword. The surrounding space quickly returned to normalcy. Linley Barak, I have already satisfied your request. As she spoke, the life Overgod sword flew out of her hands and floated towards Linley. And then, the body of the Overgod of life slowly dissipated. In the blink of an eye, the world returned to its normal calm, as though the Overgod of life had never appeared. The life Overgod sword. Linley held the sword, and the coiling vines that were carved atop the handle were perfectly suited for his hand to grip onto. Why don't I feel anything? Linley wielded the life Overgod sword, but couldn't feel any unusual energy to it. He couldn't help but turn to look at the nearby Blue Fire and Beirut. Lord Beirut, tell me, what was the use of me requesting this Overgod sword? Haha, of course there's an important use for it. Beirut laughed loudly. An Overgod artifact. An Overgod artifact. Blue Fire's eyes were shining as well. Right at this moment, BB sent to Linley, Boss, my grandpa asked you to acquire an Overgod artifact, but you are unable to bind it. After all, only by using sovereign power can that be done. Do you think that grandpa did this because he wants it for himself? BB was a bit worried for Linley. Linley looked carefully at Beirut and Blue Fire, then shook his head mentally and said, I don't think so. Given Beirut's power, if he wanted it, he would have taken it long ago. Prior to this, when I wanted to ask to bring Grandpa Douring back to life, Lord Beirut and Mr. Leyland didn't try to stop me. True. BB nodded slightly. I have the life Overgod sword in hand now, but, Linley didn't feel much joy in his heart, because his goal had been to bring Grandpa Douring back to life. That hadn't happened. If Grandpa Douring could now come to life and appear before Linley, and call out Linley's name, Linley probably would have gone wild with joy. Unfortunately, after this, Linley now truly understood that there was no hope at all for Grandpa Douring to come back to life. Lord Beirut. Mr. Leyland. You wanted me to seize this opportunity to request an Overgod artifact from the Overgod of life. Linley looked towards Beirut and Blue Fire, puzzled. Now, I have acquired this Overgod sword, but my lack of power makes it so that I cannot bind it. So what do you want me to do with this Overgod sword? For him, the Overgod sword probably wouldn't even be as effective as Mirage. Linley, you don't need to be impatient about this. Bluefire said with a laugh. Linley, don't worry. Since I wanted you to acquire this Overgod sword, then, I naturally have a way to make it so that you can use it. Beirut smiled. Linley was no fool. Upon hearing this, a sudden light flashed in his mind, and he called out in alarm. Lord Beirut, are you saying? Do you really need to ask? Linley, tell me, how do you think I became a sovereign? Bluefire chortled merrily. Grandpa, can it be that you are intending to let my boss become a sovereign? BB called out in shock. Beirut chortled, but didn't deny it. Seeing the look on Beirut's face, BB was now completely certain. He couldn't help but say in disbelief, Grandpa, to become a sovereign, you need a sovereign spark. You and Mr. Leyland are sovereigns, can it be that you have other sovereign sparks as well? Linley just looked at Beirut, puzzled. Even if Beirut had sovereign sparks, would he really let Linley use them? No need to ask so many questions. Just follow me. Beirut smiled, then immediately turned to fly back. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 2. The 18th floor of the Necropolis of the Gods. The skies above the South Sea of the Yulon Plain. Beirut and the others were traveling through it at high speed. Become a sovereign. Linley stared at Beirut, up ahead. The events which had occurred within this short day had all been too stunning. Linley felt a bit numb. At first, it had been Beirut displaying his power as a sovereign. Then, Bluefire had also displayed the power of a sovereign. Right afterwards, he had met the Overgod of life. Linley truly felt as though he were in a dream. And now, based on what Beirut was saying, it seemed as though he was going to make Linley become a sovereign. Linley struggled to calm himself down. Only then did he speak out. Lord Beirut, why would you choose me for the precious opportunity to become a sovereign? Harry, BB, and the others, you should choose them. Linley spoke bluntly. Truth be told, in terms of closeness of relationships, Harry and his brothers were Beirut's own children. Them. Beirut turned to glance at Linley, then laughed. I gave them a chance, but they weren't able to grasp it. Grandpa, what do you mean, couldn't handle it? The nearby Bluefire raised a crimson eyebrow, then laughed as he stared at the vast, endless sea water in front of them. All right, we'll be arriving up ahead. This is, Linley spread his senses forward. There should be an interdimensional portal below. A corridor to the Necropolis of the Gods. In the past, Linley had adventured through the Necropolis of the Gods. Back then, Linley had only been a saint. After experiencing countless tribulations, he had acquired divine sparks. That time, however, Linley had come to a halt on the 11th floor. Come in. Beirut said with a smile, then directly flew downwards. Rumble, the formerly placid waters of the sea instantly rose up, then parted like a curtain on two sides, revealing an immeasurably deep tunnel. Linley and BB hurriedly followed Beirut and Bluefire deep into the depths of the sea. Deep within the sea, it was completely silent. There wasn't any hint of light. Some enormous deep-sea behemoths swam about slowly. Linley's group of 4 instantly reached the bottom of the sea, moving so quickly that many of the deep-sea magical beasts didn't even notice them. The bottom of the seabed was filled all sorts of random sea plants, as well as underwater mountain ranges. The seabed coral reefs rose up atop each other, reaching heights as great as 1,000 meters. Sometimes, they would also sink down into bottomless, unfathomably deep trenches. Linley's group of 4 strode across the bottom of the sea. While striding forward up ahead, Beirut suddenly turned and went into one of the bottomless trenches next to the reefs. Linley's group of 3 had no choice but to follow. This fathomlessly deep tunnel was like the bowels of a behemoth, dark, cold, and immeasurable. Grandpa, weren't we going to the Necropolis of the Gods? The interdimensional portal that leads to the Necropolis of the Gods is still up ahead. Where are we going? BB asked while following. I need to retrieve something, Beirut said with a smile. Linley was filled with questions, but he still maintained his silence, continuing to follow forward. After moving roughly 10,000 meters deeper, they finally reached the bottom. The bottom of this deep tunnel was an empty space that had a circumference of hundreds of meters, but the strange thing was, even the sea water was kept outside. Grandpa, what is this, exactly? BB said, curious. The nearby blue fire let out a sigh. Beirut, you prepared this in the past, but it seems your preparations no longer need to be made use of. Beirut waved his hand, and a powerful surge of green aura shot out from Beirut's palm. It instantly separated into 10 million strands of fine green light, penetrating into the rocky walls of this deep cave. The walls greedily drank in the green light, and instantly, a large number of magical runes began to slowly appear atop the walls. This is a magical formation. Linley frowned as he spoke. This is a very unique sealing magical formation. Blue Fire laughed as he spoke. In the past, Beirut had schemed to acquire it from the infernal realm. This sealing magical formation was altered by Beirut. If you want to activate this sealing magical formation, you must have the power of a sovereign. Otherwise, there is no way you can open it. Lord Beirut. Linley didn't understand. This sealing magical formation was constructed in the Yulan plane. But other sovereigns aren't able to enter the Yulan plane. Why be so cautious? I was just preparing against all eventualities. Beirut let out a sigh. I was worried that one day, I would be killed by the chief sovereign of light, and also have my treasures be taken away. Thus, I never carried them on me. Rather, I kept them here in the Yulan plane. I was worried that the chief sovereign of light would send high gods to come seize it, and so it requires that someone have the power of a sovereign in order to be able to break this sealing magical formation. If one day I were to die, this treasure would enter Bluefire's safekeeping. Beirut said. The deep underwater tunnel had already slowly grown brighter, to the point of being eye-piercingly brilliant. Suddenly. Bang! The four walls of the cave and the floor all suddenly trembled, and then completely transformed into dust which flowed down. The grand sealing formation. Linley now completely understood. Beirut had used this grand formation to completely seal off a meter-thick layer of rock at the bottom of this underwater cave. Given Beirut's abilities in setting up this grand formation, if outsiders wished to break it, they would have to at least be as strong as him. But setting up this formation was definitely no simple task. Lord Beirut, why did you come to break this grand sealing formation today? Linley said, not understanding. It no longer has any purpose, so I might as well break it. Beirut smiled, then waved his hand. A gust of wind swept downwards, blowing all of the sand to one side and revealing a black box that was just the size of a palm. Beirut's eyes lit up, and he stretched his hand out to grab the black box. Blue Fire, seeing this, laughed as well. Grandpa, what is inside? BB said, puzzled. Guess. Beirut chortled. Can it be that it was because of this treasure, that the chief sovereign of light wishes to kill you, Grandpa? Is this treasure the sovereign spark? Or is it a treasure that is on the level of an Overgod talisman? BB guessed. Haha, you are quite clever. All right, it is time for us to go to the Necropolis of the gods. Beirut chortled. Linley followed behind Beirut, flying once more out from that deep tunnel and towards the interdimensional portal. The portal was located atop an enormous, pitch-black stone that was in the center of a deep ocean valley. The strange spatial ripples could be seen and sensed clearly by Linley's group from far away. In you go. Beirut willed it, and the interdimensional portal opened. The four immediately flew in. They flew through and to the other side of the portal, where they arrived at a different plane. The Necropolis of the gods. Linley had come here before. He could sense the restrictive power of this plane, and he couldn't help but look towards Beirut in confusion. Lord Beirut, this plane should be on a much higher level than a material plane. How can it be so tightly connected with the Yulon plane? Linley had entered this place as a mere saint. Even one of the 5 prime saints of the Yulon continent, such as Fane, disciple of the war god, had been limited to a divine sense of just 10 or so meters. This is a plane that was created by a sovereign. Bluefire laughed calmly. This is a so-called divine plane. Naturally, its restrictive power will be far greater than a material plane's. However, compared to the infernal realm, the restrictive power is much smaller. Linley evaluated. The nearby Beirut laughed. Linley, upon becoming a sovereign, one can create a plane. According to legend, however, the infernal realm, netherworld, celestial realm, and life realm were created separately and individually by the 4 overgods. Of course their restrictive power is great. As for the 7 divine planes, they were jointly created by the 7 sovereigns of each element. The divine light plane, for example, was created by the chief sovereign of light and the other 6 sovereigns of light working in concert. It is more stable and powerful than this plane of mine as well. After all, this is a plane that I, a lesser sovereign, made by myself. Indeed. Linley already had a vague suspicion that perhaps it was Beirut who had created this plane. Create a divine plane? Wow, that's incredible. BB called out in surprised joy. But Grandpa, sovereigns should be able to enter this divine plane, right? Aren't you afraid that the chief sovereign of light will come? Don't worry. This divine plane is connected to the Yulon plane. If another sovereign wishes to enter this plane of mine, as soon as they touch the borders of it, I, as the creator of the plane, will know. If the chief sovereign of light comes, I will instantly enter the Yulon plane. Beirut smiled. Linley secretly sighed in praise. Beirut truly is cautious. The necropolis of the gods is up ahead. Beirut pointed into the distance. The waters of the deep sea surged forward. Linley could clearly see that up ahead, there was an enormous, sharp-tipped necropolis that was nearly 20,000 meters tall and which had a circumference of 10,000 meters. At the front of the necropolis was still that enormous carving of a wingless dragon, an enormous dragon that lay coiled. Its aura was truly astonishing. The other 3 sides had carvings of the other 3 divine beasts. Last time, Linley hadn't understood, but this time, Linley completely understood. Linley hurriedly asked frantically, Lord Beirut, of the 4 carving, this enormous dragon carving is absolutely identical to the azure dragon phantom that appears when I execute my innate divine ability. As for the other 3 divine beast carvings, they are identical to the other 3 divine beast sculptures I saw within the Skirite mountains of the infernal realm. Is there something special about this place? Yes. This 4 carvings are of the 4 divine beasts. Beirut said with a sigh. Follow me. Beirut immediately flew towards the top of the necropolis of the gods. Linley immediately followed. This necropolis of the gods had, in total, 18 floors. Logically speaking, one should have to enter from the first floor, then constantly advance. But this time, Beirut actually led Linley and the others directly to the very tip of the necropolis of the gods, and at the top of the wall, a tunnel appeared out of nowhere. Beirut and Bluefire stepped forward. Although Linley and BB felt puzzled, they still followed from behind. This was a vast, empty space that they had moved into. The entire floor was formed from large pieces of bluestone that were 10 meters long. This giant bluestone floor seemed to stretch off into infinity. The ground was azure. The sky was azure. Azure with no hint of other colors, it was so clear and bright. Beirut, Linley, and the others appeared on the bluestone floor. This is... Linley stared around, puzzled. Logically speaking, each floor of the necropolis of the gods should have guardians, but this floor actually had no one in it at all. This is the top of the necropolis of the gods. The 18th floor. Beirut smiled. Bibi said in surprise, Grandpa, why is it that there is no one here at the legendary 18th floor? Isn't it supposed to be the most terrifyingly dangerous? Who said that the 18th floor is dangerous? Beirut laughed. Doesn't it get more and more dangerous, the higher up you go? Bibi mumbled, not understanding. Hey, boss, where are you going? Bibi realized that Linley was actually moving forward. Beirut, seeing the situation, laughed. Let's go. Linley has already discovered it? Linley had indeed discovered it. In the past, the very first time he had come to the Necropolis of the Gods, he sensed that something within the upper reaches of the Necropolis of the Gods was calling to him. But, at that time, he didn't have the power to advance farther up. Now, Linley discovered that it was this 18th floor that called to him, that drew him. Lord Beirut, this bluestone floor, beneath it, Linley turned to look at Beirut. Wait a moment. Beirut laughed while walking over, his gaze landing on the bluestone floor. Kriyayak. Countless bluestone floor tiles began to move about in an orderly fashion. Beneath the bluestone floor, an enormous object began to slowly rise. The bluestone tiles that had simply served as a floor, in the blink of an eye, actually formed into a giant platform, atop which lay an enormous azure dragon corpse that was more than 10,000 meters long. That close, familiar aura was calling to Linley. The ancestor, the azure dragon. Stunned, Linley stared with wide eyes. He was immediately able to recognize it. Beirut walked over, then sighed, right. There are, in total, 3 Necropolis of the Gods. The other 2 are only used to store the corpses of ordinary deities, while this one is the great one. This Necropolis of the Gods, on its 18th floor, has the corpse of the azure dragon within it. As for the 18th floors of the other 3 directions, they store the corpses of the vermilion bird, the white tiger, and the black tortoise. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 3, 10,000 years ago, The Truth. The corpses of the 4 divine beasts. Bibi couldn't refrain from calling out in shock. Linley stared at the enormous azure dragon corpse in front of him. The draconic scales of the azure dragon were still so slick, so seemingly sharp. Even after 10,000 years had passed, the azure dragon's aura was still so awe-inspiring. Linley turned to look at Beirut. Puzzled, he said, Lord Beirut, for you and Bluefire to be able to become sovereigns, was because of the sovereign sparks of the 4 ancestors. Azure dragon. Vermilion bird. Black tortoise. White tiger. They were lesser sovereigns of the water, fire, earth, and wind elements. Although they were only lesser sovereigns, the innate abilities of the 4 divine beasts were simply too powerful, and when their 4 innate divine abilities were combined into one terrifying supreme technique, they were even able to fight against a chief sovereign. Yes. Beirut sighed, then nodded. After all, there are only so many sovereign sparks in the world. It truly was a tremendous stroke of luck for me to be able to acquire 4 at once. Grandpa, how did you acquire the sovereign sparks? When you acquired them, you were only a high god. Bibi said hurriedly. Also, how did you acquire the corpses of the 4 divine beasts? Linley was completely puzzled as well. Beirut gave Bluefire a glance, and then Beirut laughed as he looked towards Linley and Bibi, then said with a sigh, after so many years, there is no longer a need to hide this from you. Regarding the corpses of the 4 divine beasts, I must first tell you about the battle 10,000 years ago. The battle between the 4 divine beasts and the chief sovereign of light. The 4 ancestors truly were killed by the chief sovereign of light. Linley frowned. Right. It was the chief sovereign of light who killed them. Beirut nodded. That year, I was in my private room, training. Linley, that's the private room beneath your dragon blood castle. Beirut laughed, and Linley nodded slightly. He had guessed long ago that it must have been used by a powerful expert for training, and indeed, it had been Beirut. While training, I looked through the translucent membrane of the room and saw that far away, in the middle of the chaotic space, a terrifying battle was going on. It was the four divine beasts, who were fighting energetically against the chief sovereign of light, Augusta. Beirut said solemnly, and Linley listened attentively. Beirut seemed to become immersed within his memories. I was completely stupefied, back then. The four divine beasts on one side, the chief sovereign of light on the other. They were all too powerful. During this battle, the four divine beasts were the weaker side, while the chief sovereign of light held the advantage. The four divine beasts had all completely transformed into their original, divine beast bodies. In addition, the four mighty divine beasts worked together to exert their innate divine abilities. Linley and Bibi listened breathlessly. It was very terrifying, and also very strange. The innate divine abilities of the four divine beasts were actually able to fuse together perfectly, and they seemed to cause the world itself to change. A blurry, spherical light orb shot directly into the body of the chief sovereign of light. At that time, I was certain that the fused innate divine ability of the four divine beasts should be a soul-focused attack. Beirut said. Linley's heart clenched. Augusta's body just trembled, but right afterwards, he actually drew out an enormous sword of light and wildly pursued after and attacked the four divine beasts. Most likely due to the failure of their supreme attack, the four divine beasts simply couldn't believe it, leading to them losing their will to fight. In addition, they were only lesser sovereigns. In terms of speed, they were vastly inferior to the chief sovereign of light. Beirut let out a sigh. In an instant, the black tortoise, vermilion bird, and white tiger were all killed one after the other. Although the azure dragon was powerful, he wasn't able to hold on either. But right at that moment, I was moved to action. Linley and Bibi were stunned. This was because the enormous corpses of those three divine beasts, the black tortoise, the vermilion bird, and the white tiger were simply floating in chaotic space, being carried away by the streams of chaotic energy. They weren't too far away from me. Beirut's eyes were shining. Such an opportunity was not to be missed. I would give it my best shot. I used the tail of my Godada rat body to stretch into chaotic space. My body was refined by divine spark essences, and so was as strong as sovereign artifacts. My tail swung over at high speed, then with a loop, curled around the legs of the corpses of those three enormous divine beast corpses. Right at that moment, the azure dragon was killed by Augusta as well, and my tail also gave the azure dragon a powerful tug, pulling the four of them all into the Yulon plain. Linley and Bibi were completely stunned. Wealth that was acquired through great danger. Linley could imagine the resolve which Beirut had felt back then. He had risked his life to move at high speed to do this. I was frightened as well. Those were sovereigns. Success meant I would also become a sovereign. This was a rare chance. I risked everything. Beirut began to grow very excited when discussing that scene. I was also very lucky. Most likely, Augusta never imagined that someone would dare steal from the mouth of the tiger like that. In addition, his focus was on the azure dragon. When he chased after and killed the azure dragon, he used a soul attack that sent the azure dragon flying. Before dying, the azure dragon was charging towards the Yulon Plains direction to begin with. I just so happened to be able to take advantage and collect the corpses of all four of the divine beasts. Linley was completely unable to breathe. He could imagine that astonishing, dangerous scene. However, Beirut had a good chance of success. It must be understood that generally speaking, the tails of magical beasts all moved at astonishing fast speeds. As the Godada rat, a divine beast, the tail of Beirut's original body, especially when he was going all out, a rap, and a tug. That was definitely something that could occur within the blink of an eye. If Augusta reacted just a bit too slowly, he probably wouldn't be able to catch Beirut. So my ancestor, the Azure Dragon, truly was killed by a soul attack. Linley understood now why the Coiling Dragon ring had been damaged. If the Azure Dragon had been damaged and killed by Augusta's material attacks, the Coiling Dragon ring should have been perfect and undamaged. Haha. Beirut began to laugh loudly. Augusta was completely stupefied. He didn't even react at first, but then, he finally went berserk with fury. After all, he had risked his own life as well to kill the 4 divine beasts. But I took everything away instead. I, a high god, had stolen things from him, the chief sovereign of light. I would have been shocked if he didn't go berserk. Linley could completely imagine that scene. Most likely, even the chief sovereign of light hadn't been completely confident in his ability to deal with the combined forces of the 4 ancestors. Only, he was lucky enough to be successful in blocking the combined, full-force blow of the 4 ancestors, and so was then able to kill the 4 ancestors one by one. 4 sovereign sparks. That represented 4 sovereigns. Beirut laughed coldly. There was no way Augusta would be able to enter a material plane, and so, all he could do was to send his planar projection clone into the Yulon plane, wanting to kill me. Linley secretly nodded. A foreign sovereign was unable to enter a material plane. As for the 4 ancestors, they were already dead. Their corpses and sovereign sparks were mere items and no longer living things. Naturally, they could enter a material plane. Planar projection clone? That's fairly powerful as well, comparable to a 7-star fiend and even close to some Azuras. Beirut snickered. Unfortunately, even before I was a sovereign, my power was far beyond that of an ordinary Lord Prefect's. By relying on my God's Spark weapon, I smashed apart that planar projection clone. Linley laughed. Given Beirut's power and his insights in the profound mysteries of the laws, it would indeed be quite easy for him to defeat a planar projection clone. Since using force had failed, the chief sovereign of light formed yet another planar projection clone. He threatened me and told me what the consequences would be if I didn't hand over the sovereign sparks. But I couldn't be bothered to listen. I immediately fused with the wind-type sovereign spark on the spot. Beirut said with a smile. That chief sovereign of light even invited paragons to come act against me, but unfortunately, before the paragons arrived, I had already become a sovereign. Fusing a sovereign spark happens in but an instant. It is that fast. Linley called out in surprise. Fusing divine sparks takes a very long time. Bibi was surprised as well. Beirut said with a laugh, "Why does it take so long to fuse with a divine spark?" "Because you are learning and gaining insights into the various profound mysteries. Naturally, this takes time. But sovereign sparks contain no insights and no profound mysteries. Thus, they can be fused within a second. After risking my life, I had become a sovereign, and also acquired 3 more sovereign sparks." Beirut said with a sigh. "Grandpa, you really are formidable." Bibi's eyes were filled with admiration. Linley sighed in amazement as well. If he himself had seen that scene, would he have dared to steal food from the mouth of the tiger, to steal from the chief sovereign of light? This truly required courage. However, it also required enough power. After all, ordinary high gods were completely incapable of pulling in the corpses of the divine beasts from chaotic space. But of course, this also caused the chief sovereign of light to hate me to the core. He wanted to force me to hand over the other 3 divine sparks, but I paid him no heed. Beirut laughed calmly. I could tell that the chief sovereign of light had the sort of temper where he would definitely avenge any slight. Since I had already offended him, I might as well offend him to the end. Linley nodded slightly as well. Not long afterwards, I intentionally spread the word that a necropolis of the gods had been created, and that within it were the sovereign artifacts the 4 divine beasts had left behind after dying. If one wanted to fight over them, they were to come to the Yulon plain. Beirut laughed. After a sovereign dies, If someone was to take away the sovereign artifacts that they left behind, there would be no other sovereigns who would come to take them back. Linley nodded slightly. There were multiple ways to acquiring sovereign artifacts. One was to accumulate enough military merits in a planar war. Another was to become a sovereign's emissary and be gifted by the sovereign. Still another was to acquire a relic sovereign artifact of a deceased sovereign. For example, this was where Linley's Coiling Dragon ring had come from. Only, the chances of a sovereign dying were simply too low. In addition, generally speaking, only sovereigns were able to kill other sovereigns. They would collect those sovereign artifacts and not let them just be taken away. Sovereign artifacts proved to be too enticing. After the news spread, quite a few people hastened to my Yulon plane, such as some 7-star fiends of the infernal realm. Even a 12-wing angel of the divine light realm came, as well as powerful figures of the various planes. A major battle thus began here at the Yulon plane. Beirut laughed. But of course, everything was under my control. Linley laughed. Beirut had been a sovereign by then. No matter how fiercely those high gods had struggled, how could they escape Beirut's control? During that battle, I showed just a bit of my power and let my fame and reputation spread out. Immediately, some sovereigns paid attention to me. Beirut laughed. Originally, when I had seized the corpses of the 4 divine beasts, Augusta didn't announce it to everyone. Thus, many sovereigns had no idea. After I became famous, some sovereigns sent their planar projection clones to speak with me, and thus learned of this affair. And so, the chief sovereign of destruction made a request of me. What was the chief sovereign of destruction's request? Did he want the sovereign sparks? BB said. No. He requested the blood essence that could be refined from the blood of the 4 divine beasts. The source of a divine beast's power comes from their blood and lineage. The chief sovereign of destruction probably wanted to develop something from the blood essence of the 4 divine beasts. Beirut sighed. After all, in all of recorded history, only the 4 divine beasts were able to fuse their innate divine abilities together. I gave half of the blood essence of the 4 divine beasts to the chief sovereign of destruction. The chief sovereign of destruction, in turn, promised me that so long as my divine clone didn't go to the divine light plane, he would guarantee that the chief sovereign of light wouldn't dare to kill my divine clone. Beirut said. Linley and the others now understood. So that's how it is. No wonder the chief sovereign of light didn't dare to act against you in the infernal realm, Grandpa. BB said. Although he is powerful, he isn't a match for the chief sovereign of destruction. Beirut laughed. After all, the chief sovereigns of the 4 edicts are simply too powerful. The chief sovereign of life is a very friendly person. But his power is unfathomable. The chief sovereign of death lives a life of leisure in the abyssal mountain, and has never fully revealed her power. The chief sovereign of destruction's hiding abilities are quite deep. I have no idea if he developed anything from the blood essence of the 4 divine beasts or not. As for the chief sovereign of fate, he never gets involved in worldly affairs and always remains within the celestial realm. Linley sighed to himself. This exchange with the chief sovereign of destruction had been quite favorable for him. All the chief sovereign of destruction had to do was to go threaten the chief sovereign of light, and thus he was able to acquire half of the blood essence of the 4 divine beasts. It must be understood, that just by using a single drop of blood essence from the Azure Dragon, Linley's body was able to become incredibly powerful. One could imagine how much energy was contained within the blood essence of a divine beast. The blood essence of a divine beast is the essence of its power. I was quite curious regarding the blood essence of the 4 divine beasts, and so I ran a few tests as well. I tested placing a drop of blood essence in the body of an ordinary human to see what would happen. The results of the first experiments were that the humans were unable to endure it, and their bodies collapsed. They died. Afterwards, however, I grew experienced. I finally succeeded. Beirut began to laugh. And so, the very first generation of the four supreme warriors was born. Linley was completely awestruck. The four supreme warriors. Linley looked at Beirut, stunned. They were the results of your experiments. Grandpa, you, BB was completely stunned as well. What, is it very strange? Beirut laughed calmly. Actually, if I didn't interfere in the lives of Barak, Armand, Hyde, and Prey, they would have become cannon fodder on the battlefield, and wouldn't have had any accomplishments. After my experiments, they became the supreme warriors and thus gained great fame in the continent. Linley now understand. As Beirut had seen it, for a sovereign to choose mortals for experiments, and especially experiments involving the blood essence of the four divine beasts, this was an honor for the mortals. No wonder the four supreme warriors had suddenly appeared in the Yulon plain. In addition, nobody was able to find out any reason behind this. Linley sighed to himself. Strictly speaking, Barak and the rest of the four should be considered of the same generation as Gislazan of the four divine beasts clan. Beirut laughed. To be honest, I still felt grateful towards the four divine beasts. After all, it was because of them that I was able to become a sovereign. Thus, the divine clone that I sent to the infernal realm stayed at Indigo Prefecture. The blood-rich sovereign knew my true status, and so I asked him to help me by announcing to everyone else that I was his emissary. This made it easier for me to show up and protect the four divine beasts clan. Beirut laughed. If I was merely a sovereign's emissary, how could I have gotten the blood-rich sovereign to appear with but a few words, then have him make the 8 great clans retreat? Linley was sighing. When Beirut had summoned the blood-rich sovereign, the blood-rich sovereign had appeared and rebuked the 8 great clans, making them retreat. Linley had sighed in amazement back then about how much face Beirut had to be able to do this. So in reality, it wasn't that the blood-rich sovereign was giving his emissary face. Rather, it was because Beirut himself was a sovereign. Naturally, sovereigns would give other sovereigns face. I also had 3 sovereign sparks. Naturally, I would have to choose 3 people to inherit it. However, I couldn't just randomly choose them. I had to test them and to select them carefully. Blue fire thus became my first choice. Beirut then sighed. In reality, I wanted for Harry and my other 2 children to become sovereigns. But the sovereign sparks were only of earth, fire, and water, after all. Thus, they had to train to the high god level on their own in these 3 laws in order to fuse the sovereign sparks. You have to become a deity on your own in order to fuse with the sovereign spark. Linley said in surprise. Right. If you don't rely on yourself and instead rely on fusing with the divine spark, then your foundation will be weak and unstable. Your divine spark and your soul will not be perfectly fused, and so it will be impossible for you to then fuse with the sovereign spark. Beirut shook his head. Those children of mine were only talented in darkness and wind. I tried everything I could, but they still weren't able to succeed in those 3 elements. Linley nodded slightly. Afterwards, because BB appeared, and especially because of your rapid advancements, Linley, and how astonishingly fast you rose in power, I chose you as one of my potential candidates. Beirut turned to look towards Linley. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 4, Sovereign Linley. One of the candidates. So Beirut had been keeping an eye on all of his adventures through the infernal realm, and had been constantly evaluating him. Although I became a sovereign, I, like any ordinary mortal, wish to be able to give the sovereign sparks to those people who are close to me. My 3 children and BB, they clearly wouldn't possibly have any accomplishments in earth, fire, and water. Because of BB, it was natural for me to entrust you with my hopes as well. But I also understood that amongst sovereigns of the same rank, if there was too great a difference in one's insights into the profound mysteries, that wouldn't work either. Linley, back then, your comprehension of the profound mysteries of the laws was simply at too low a level. Beirut sighed. After all, even the weakest of sovereigns has fused 5 types of profound mysteries. I'm that sort, myself. But of course, the vast majority has fused just 5 profound mysteries. The weakest have fused 5. Linley was a bit startled. Grandpa. BB said, surprised, you once said that many sovereigns were amongst the very first batch of high gods that rose shortly after the creation of the universe, who were lucky enough to seize a sovereign spark. Their innate talent isn't necessarily high, how could they have fused 5 profound mysteries? It must be understood that for many experts, fusing 3 or even 4 profound mysteries was their limit, and they wouldn't be able to make any further breakthroughs. Haha, Beirut began to laugh, then he looked mysteriously at Linley. As for why even the less talented sovereigns are able to fuse 5 profound mysteries, after you become a sovereign, you will understand. After I become a sovereign. Linley's heart trembled. Although after you become a sovereign, your future accomplishments will be significant, Beirut shook his head. The stronger you are as a deity, the better. Back then, you had only fused 3 profound mysteries. You only relied on the soul stone and the powerful body given to you by your azure dragon lineage to defeat 7 star fiends. The candidates that I consider generally had fused at least 5 profound mysteries. Beirut shook his head and said, for example, Blue Fire. He was the most powerful of them. He had even reached a final bottleneck, and was just 1 step away from becoming a paragon. Linley sighed in his heart. Beirut had been keeping watch over a group of people. If he was being completely impartial, Linley wouldn't even be qualified to become a potential candidate. But of course, because of BB, I still hoped that you would become a sovereign. Beirut laughed. This was the nature of human relationships. Who wouldn't hope for the possibility of giving nice things to their closest family and friends? However, your improvement speed is indeed fast. Your trip through the netherworld made me evaluate you even more seriously. Beirut smiled. In fact, I even asked Bluefire to have his original body and his divine earth clone follow you in secret that entire time, protecting you if necessary. Follow in secret. Linley and BB looked at Bluefire in shock. Bluefire had been tracking him, but they hadn't realized at all. Linley, I was quite surprised, because you actually were able to fuse a 4th profound mystery in the planar battlefield. You developed your new supreme technique, microcosm. Beirut laughed. That technique of yours, especially when combined with the special way of using the Redbud Sovereign's amethyst space, had already surpassed the techniques of most experts who had fused 5 types of profound mysteries. In 2000 short years, you had fused 4 profound mysteries. This sort of speed, even across the entire universe, definitely qualified you as a genius. Beirut laughed happily. I was certain that if you continued to train like this, you would absolutely be able to fuse 5 profound mysteries. And so, then and there, I decided that you would be the candidate to become the sovereign of Earth. Beirut said. Linley let out a moved sigh. No wonder. BB mumbled. No wonder back then, Mr. Leyland appeared. Right. My assignment, by that point, was essentially complete. Bluefire laughed, and then he looked at Linley. The demigod who had received tutelage from me back at Mount Copper Gong had, in 2000 short years, had reached such heights, and was going to be, in the future, my comrade, the sovereign of Earth. This truly was incredible. Who would have imagined, that shortly after I left, a major problem occurred? I was terrified as well. After all, my sovereign clone couldn't leave the Yulon plane, while my original body wasn't able to make it in time, even though I hurried back to save you. I was truly worried that you would be killed by Magnus, just like that. Beirut let out an emotional sigh as well. Bluefire told me that you had suffered an attack from Magnus, and that you were a hair away from death. I was very worried as well. Worried that you would die. But who would have imagined that this became your chance to transform? Beirut's eyes were shining. You had 4 divine clones, yet were able to successfully mutate your soul. This let you become a supreme expert who surpassed the paragons. Haha, Linley, you, as a soul mutate, are even more qualified than Bluefire and myself. The more powerful a person was, the more powerful they would naturally become upon becoming a sovereign. Linley, look, Beirut waved his hand, and a black stone box appeared. Linley immediately recognized that this black stone box was the box that had been removed from that giant ceiling formation. You should have already guessed what is inside. Beirut smiled as he opened the box. He tossed aside the lid, and instantly, 2 auras of light shot out in every direction, and a heart-shaking aura drifted out from the light. Linley and BB couldn't help but stare raptly towards it. Within the box was a pair of gems that appeared similar to divine sparks. The gems seemed to be made of a semi-translucent gray glass. At first glance, it seemed like some sort of jewels. These 2 gems were emanating 2 different types of light. One was a deep, weighty, earthen yellow color. The other was a soft, slick azure green color. In addition, the aura and majesty contained within them made even Linley and BB's hearts tremble. These are sovereign sparks. Linley was absolutely certain. Beirut let out a very emotional sigh. These 2 sovereign sparks are the water-type sovereign spark that came from the azure dragon's corpse, and the earth-type sovereign spark that came from the black tortoise's corpse. I have already safeguarded these 2 sovereign sparks for more than 10,000 years. I was worried that on one of my business trips outside of the Yulon Plain, I might be attacked and killed by the chief sovereign of light. What, then, would happen to these sovereign sparks? And so I decided that even if I died, I wouldn't let Augusta acquire them. Thus, I created that seal. Linley secretly nodded. A seal that only sovereigns could break, and yet was kept in a material plane. The chief sovereign of light truly did have no hope of opening it. Alas! How wonderful would it have been if we had a darkness-type sovereign spark? BB rubbed his jaw twice and mumbled. Beirut laughed as he glanced at BB. Do you think sovereign sparks are so easily acquired? All right, Linley. Let me tell you this. If you want to become a sovereign, there is only one way, and one way alone: fuse with the sovereign spark. Regarding sovereign sparks, ever since the creation of the universe countless years ago, 77 sovereign sparks naturally descended. Only by training to the high god level through your own power can you fuse a sovereign spark. Linley nodded slightly. Training to become a sovereign was indeed something which pure effort could accomplish. The reason why sovereigns are so powerful is because of their sovereign spark. High god paragons, and you, a soul mutate, have fused the power of your will into your souls, yes. Beirut laughed. Right. Linley nodded. Sovereigns are different. Virtually all of the power of their will is in the sovereign spark. Beirut said. When fusing a sovereign spark, the boundless will power held within the sovereign spark will transform your soul. Because the souls of your other divine clones are part of you, they, too, will receive a partial transformation. But that's secondary, compared to the will within the sovereign spark. The power of the will of the souls of your clones will be less than 10,000th. Linley nodded slightly. Lord Beirut? Linley asked, puzzled. There are lesser, intermediate, and high ranks amongst sovereigns. If I become a lesser sovereign, but in the future acquire an intermediate sovereign spark of the same element, will I be able to fuse it? No, Beirut didn't hesitate at all. If you become a lesser sovereign, you will be a lesser sovereign for your entire life. Beirut said. But of course, if you have 2 divine clones, you can separately fuse 2 different sovereign sparks. This is possible. According to legend, the chief sovereign of lightning has an additional sovereign clone which is a sovereign of earth. Linley was awestruck. A single person, take 2 sovereign positions. Haha, Linley, enough of the chief sovereign of lightning. Even you will be in possession of two sovereign bodies. Beirut suddenly said. What? Linley was completely shocked. Grandpa, what did you say? Bibi cried out in shock. You are going to let boss? Beirut's eyes were flashing, and he laughed as he spoke. If Linley was just an ordinary paragon, there is no way I would let him simultaneously fuse with two types of sovereign sparks. However, he is a soul mutate. He can fuse divine power. I very much want to see how powerful Linley will be, once he is both a sovereign of earth and a sovereign of water. The nearby blue fire seemed very excited as well. Originally, Beirut was only planning to let you become a sovereign of earth. But then, your soul mutation was a success. Beirut's plans were changed. He was prepared to let you have two sovereign clones. I never even dared imagine that one day, I would be able to openly walk out of the Yulon plane. This was because I had no confidence in my ability to fight against Augusta. Beirut's eyes turned sharp. However, Linley, your soul mutation gave me hope. Ever since the creation of the universe, there have only been so many sovereigns. The conditions necessary for the creation of a soul mutate, however, are very harsh and strict. There has never been a soul mutate amongst the sovereigns. Although there are some who possess two sovereign clones, because they are unable to fuse their powers, they naturally wouldn't grow much stronger. But you, Linley, are different. Beirut stared at Linley. You are a soul mutate. I very much want to know what level of power you will have, after becoming a sovereign of two different elements. In fact, I even believe that there is hope for you to be able to lead me out of the Yulon plane, and for me to no longer fear the chief sovereign of light, Augusta. Beirut's eyes were sharp. It was precisely because he saw, on Linley, his hope for departing the Yulon plane. This was why Beirut had been so excited and had lost his composure. A fusion sovereign? This was definitely unheard of. The heavens have treated me with great kindness. I had originally worried about Augusta being in possession of an Overgod artifact, but now, haha, you have an Overgod weapon as well. Beirut was extremely excited. Everything has gone perfectly. I can already sense, Linley, that you, a hitherto unseen fusion sovereign, definitely will not disappoint me. Linley couldn't help but feel hot blood pumping through him. Indeed. Other sovereigns with two sovereign clones who were not soul mutates wouldn't be able to fuse their sovereign power. Only Linley could. Only he was a true fusion sovereign. Linley, fuse them. Beirut tossed the stone box towards Linley. Linley looked at the two glass-like sovereign sparks within the stone box, then at Beirut, Blue Fire, and Bibi. The three of them all had looks of hope in their eyes. Fusing the sovereign sparks, although he felt his blood boiling in his veins, Linley forced himself to calm down. I'll first fuse with a single spark, then the other one. Linley felt that it would be safer to advance step by step. Drip. A single drop of blood leaked out from Linley's finger, landing atop the surface of the Earth-type sovereign spark. Instantly, the Earth-type sovereign spark levitated into the air. A dense, earthen yellow aura shot out in every direction. Linley willed it, and instantly his body changed, with his divine Earth clone emerging and the other three clones, along with his original body, remaining in his sea of consciousness. His earthen yellow hair fluttered freely as he stared directly at the Earth-type sovereign spark. Rumble. The 18th floor of the Necropolis of the gods originally had an azure sky and an azure ground. But in this instant, the universe seemed to instantly change. A terrifyingly dense surge of earth and yellow elemental essences suddenly filled this entire universe. A flood of earth and yellow water suddenly manifested around Linley and swirled around him. This flood of earth and yellow water was liquefied Earth-type sovereign power, and that Earth-type sovereign spark was slowly sinking itself into Linley's forehead. A new sovereign has been born. Beirut had a hint of a smile at the corner of his lips. Beirut felt very satisfied at having been able to bring about a new sovereign. At the same time, he was a bit nervous. A fusion sovereign which has never before appeared. What will this be like? Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 5, Magic Compilation, Fusion Sovereign. The 18th floor of the Necropolis of the Gods. It seemed to have turned into a sea of earth and yellow elemental essences. As for Linley, he hovered there, eyes closed, an awesome presence emanating from his body. Beirut, Bluefire, and BB all watched unblinkingly from nearby. Within Linley's sea of consciousness, his original body, wind clone, fire clone, and water clone were seated in the meditative position on the surface of his sea of consciousness. The four bodies just so happened to form a square, and right above them hovered a swiveling, glass-like gemstone. A surge of invisible, untouchable will was circulating towards Linley's 5 souls. The souls of his original body and his 4 clones were, in reality, one and the same. At this moment, the soul of his divine earth clone was rapidly improving, while the souls of his original body and his other 3 divine clones were improving somewhat slower. Indeed, it is as Lord Beirut had said. The will of a sovereign is virtually inexhaustible, but completely focused within the sovereign spark. Their actual souls contain very little will. Linley could sense that although the amount of will within his 5 souls had increased somewhat, there was a limit to it. The soul of his divine earth clone, after having transformed into a sovereign, had only gained an increase in will that was comparable to the will which a high god paragon possessed. As for his original body and his 3 other clones, they only gained roughly 80% of the will which a high god paragon was in possession of. No wonder. So this is why even if a sovereign were to send his clone to enter a material plane, he still wouldn't be able to kill a high god paragon. Linley sighed to himself, then mused, however. Even before becoming a sovereign, my will had already surpassed that of a paragon. Now, I've only grown stronger. Right at this moment, an awe-inspiring flood of gold suddenly entered his mind. This formless golden flood merged into his sea of consciousness and sank into his soul. This. Linley felt as though he suddenly became tens of times more clear-minded, and that his soul's analytical abilities were increasing dramatically. This is, the energy of faith. Linley was completely stunned. Actually, Linley had always been absorbing faith energy, but that bit of faith energy which he received from the Yulon plane, to the current Linley, was nothing at all. Still, even that bit of faith energy had allowed Linley's training speed to increase by quite a bit. Currently, however, it was as though a flood of faith energy had entered his sea of consciousness. The amount he received every instant was comparable to all the faith energy he had built up over the past few thousand years. The 18th floor of the Necropolis of the Gods. The flood of earth and yellow elemental essences had disappeared. The world once again returned to an azure color. Linley opened his eyes, staring at Beirut and Bluefire in shock. Lord Beirut, this faith energy. You are a sovereign, now. You are no longer weaker than me. There is no need to address me as Lord Beirut. You can just address me as Beirut. Beirut just laughed. Linley felt gratitude towards Beirut. It was Beirut who had given him the sovereign spark, in fact, had given him 2. In addition, for thousands of years, he had constantly been taking care of Linley. Linley couldn't forget any of this. Lord Beirut, if we didn't know each other, naturally we would use our comparative power to determine our comparative status. But Lord Beirut, even I myself have no idea as to how I should repay the kindness you have shown me. After his soul mutation, Linley had become as powerful as a high god paragon. If they were to determine status through comparing power levels, given that Linley didn't know that Beirut was a sovereign, logically speaking, Linley should have already started to address him as Beirut. Linley, however, had not. In Linley's heart, Beirut was like a patient, helpful elder relative who had always taken care of him. Haha, since you say that, then I'll thicken my face for once and ask both you and BB to address me as Grandpa Beirut. What say you? Beirut chortled. When he had discovered Bibi's existence, Beirut had begun to pay attention to Linley as well. Beirut had always been watching Linley, ever since he was a youth. Unconsciously, the care he felt towards Bibi had naturally been partially transferred to Linley as well. "Grandpa Beirut," Linley said hurriedly. Haha, hearing this, Beirut was absolutely delighted. Right now, Beirut's mindset had somewhat changed. Previously, Bibi's existence made it so that between Linley and Beirut, there existed a relationship that was akin to that of an elder and a junior. This relationship was a bit of a vague one, however, and had never been formalized. Although one of the reasons why Beirut had chosen Linley was because Linley's power had qualitatively risen greatly, it was also because he wanted to borrow Linley's strength to fight back against the chief sovereign of light. But in this instant, when Linley also began to address Beirut as Grandpa, Beirut naturally began to feel differently. He understood that Linley's power was going to vastly outstrip his. For him to have helped raise such a supreme expert, and one who was a junior in his own family, naturally, Beirut felt very gratified. "Excellent, excellent." Beirut laughed. "Just now, you were speaking of faith energy. Right. As soon as I became a sovereign, I could sense a terrifyingly dense stream of faith energy flood into my sea of consciousness. What is this all about?" Linley was stunned. The nearby blue fire laughed. "Linley, prior to this, weren't you asking about why all sovereigns have fused at least 5 types of profound mysteries? It's true that not all sovereigns are innately gifted. For them to all have fused 5 profound mysteries or more is indeed inconceivable." Linley suddenly came to his senses. "Are you saying that this is because of faith energy?" Linley recollected the purpose of faith energy. It allows experts to be able to gain insights faster and train faster. But of course, there was a limit to how much faith energy could help. If there wasn't, there wouldn't be so few sovereign paragons. How could there be so much faith energy? "Terrifyingly much," Linley said hurriedly. Beirut explained, "Linley, there are countless material planes. Some worship churches of light, others of darkness, others of earth, others of lightning, others of destruction. There are all sorts of temples that have been built across the countless planes. The amount of faith energy they draw in is terrifyingly great. Let me give an example. In the countless planes of the universe, how many living creatures worship light? The number is incalculable. All of that faith energy will build up, and 99% of it will be acquired by the 7 sovereigns of light. The faith energy they receive every single instant is a terrifying amount." Beirut laughed. "Precisely because they are infused with so much faith energy, sovereigns train much faster and gain insights much more easily. This is why every single sovereign has fused at least 5 profound mysteries." "So that's the situation," Bibi mumbled. "That's cheating. If it weren't for that, why would the sovereigns have made it so that their churches would be founded throughout the planes of the universe? Why would they have to compile all sorts of types of magic?" Beirut laughed. "Compile magic?" Linley was startled. "What, is it very odd?" Beirut laughed calmly. "Linley, think about it. What are magical incantations comparable to? In executing a magic spell, one had to use spiritual energy to support the magical incantation needed to use one's own mage force to activate the elemental essence of the world and form a magic spell. Some powerful magi could even use their powerful souls to instacast spells without needing to rely on magical incantations. For example, a magus of the 8th rank could use incantations to cast spells of the 8th rank, but if he wanted to instacast, he would only be able to instacast lower rank spells. Magical incantations lower the requirements for casting magical spells. A magus who relies solely on his own power is only able to cast lower level spells. But by relying on magical incantations, he is able to unleash far more powerful magic. Linley instantly understood. By relying on magical incantations, one's attack power will immediately increase greatly. This is much like how the profound mysteries of the laws can increase one's attack power. Right. Beirut smiled. Magical incantations are the simplified versions of the profound mysteries of the laws. Although they aren't as powerful as the laws, they are still very useful. Right, right. Linley suddenly understood it all. Haha, for example, the wind-type forbidden level spell, Dimensional Etch. It's simply a basic version of the dimensional attack profound mystery of the laws of the wind. And the 9th rank spell of the wind, Void Extermination. This is a simplified way of applying the spatial wind of the laws of the wind. The nearby BB, hearing this, nodded and said in delight, right. The supergravity field of Earth magic is just a simple version of gravitational space. And many ordinary Earth-type magic spells are based on the profound mysteries of the essence of the Earth. When they did a serious comparison, Linley and BB now completely realized that many magic spells were simplified, basic versions of the profound mysteries of the laws. Although Magi didn't know a single thing about the profound mysteries, by rote memory and repetition, they could memorize magic incantations and thus unleash powerful magic. As they understood more about the profound mysteries, they would constantly rise in power, to the point where Magi would naturally give up the incantations and embark on the true, great path of analyzing the profound mysteries directly. Magical incantations actually are a simple, superficial way of applying the power of the profound mysteries of the laws. Linley sighed in praise. One needs to have an extremely deep level of insight into the nature of elemental essences and the profound mysteries of the laws in order to develop magical incantations. If I had to develop new spells, it would probably take me very long as well. The principle behind magical incantations was actually a type of auto-hypnosis. One would adjust one's spiritual energy to better fuse with the elemental essences. But developing new incantations, that was extremely difficult. Beirut laughed. For the sake of making sure that their supply of faith energy would continue, it only makes sense that the sovereigns would spend vast amounts of time developing magic spells. However, the sovereigns are now virtually all at their limit. And so, their control over the material planes has lessened. Beirut laughed calmly. Naturally, some of the material planes have produced a few churches that solely worship a single figure, who receives all of their faith energy for personal use. This is what is known as heresy, which absolutely must be exterminated. The sovereigns would even go so far as to send their planar projection clones to go eradicate any traces of heresy. However, the sovereigns are now paying less attention to heretics. It isn't like before, where they would annihilate all heretical churches. Linley nodded slightly. The population of the Yulon Plain was tiny, compared to the Okerlund Plain, which had a population of 8 quadrillion. How much faith energy could it provide? The amount of planes the universe held, all added up, came to a terrifying figure. If, for example, the humans of the Okerlund Plain worship the radiant goddess, where does the faith energy go to? Linley asked. The radiant goddess. Beirut laughed. If there isn't a clear figure of worship, and just a vague radiant goddess, more than 99% of the faith energy will be taken by the 7 sovereigns of light. Only a very small amount will be acquired by the light-type deities of the Okerlund Plain. Linley sighed to himself. Sovereigns truly were dominating. However, this wasn't determined by the sovereigns, it was part of the edicts of the world. No wonder sovereigns are so powerful. With so much faith energy, my own training speed will increase explosively as well. Linley mused to himself. And then, he looked towards the second sovereign spark in the stone box, the water-type sovereign spark. Drip. A drop of fresh blood fell atop the water-type sovereign spark and was absorbed by the jewel. A dazzling azure-green aura suddenly sprang up. Rumble, the world once more became filled with a thick amount of elemental essences, this time of water. The liquefied water-type sovereign power flooded towards and swirled around Linley, beginning to enter his body. Just like before, Linley's 5 souls once more began to increase in power. Bluefire and Beirut exchanged glances. Beirut, what level will Linley reach? Bluefire asked. Uncertain. Beirut said solemnly. But I know that upon fusing 2 sovereign sparks, the power of one's will in the soul will be quite a bit greater than the rest of us normal sovereigns have. In addition, he himself is a 4-way soul mutate to begin with, and already possesses the power of will. Even if we don't consider other things, the power of his will should already be comparable to an intermediate sovereign's. The nearby BB said hurriedly, and his fused sovereign power. Right. There has never before been a fusion of 2 different types of sovereign power. And his power has still more room to grow. Beirut smiled and nodded. Fused sovereign power should be even more powerful than a normal intermediate sovereign's power. Paired with an Overgod artifact. Paired with an Overgod artifact, he should be comparable to those chief sovereigns who do not have an Overgod artifact. Bluefire said, rather excited. Right. But of course, it's hard to say if something special would happen for a fusion sovereign. Beirut said. And right at this moment, the levitating Linley opened his eyes. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 6, Entrusted. The 18th floor of the Necropolis of the Gods. It had grown calm again. Linley's eyes were now open. Seeing that Linley had fused with the sovereign sparks, Beirut, Bluefire, and BB couldn't help but have their faces covered by smiles. Linley, how do you feel? Beirut asked, rather nervous. Beirut had never felt so nervous, not once in all these years. But right now, he was truly nervous. What if Linley, after fusing 2 sovereign sparks, wasn't as powerful as he had imagined? This would affect whether or not he, Beirut, would be able to openly depart the Yulon plane in the future. If he would be able to go roam about the higher planes and the divine planes. I feel, a hint of a smile was on Linley's face. Not bad at all. Not bad at all. Beirut, Bluefire, and BB all stared at Linley, puzzlement on their faces. What level of power did Linley's not bad at all represent? Boss, are you as powerful as a chief sovereign yet? BB suddenly asked. Linley hesitated slightly. Grenadpa Beirut, do you know how great a difference in power there is between lesser sovereigns, intermediate sovereigns, and high sovereigns? Linley asked. Without a clear understanding as to how powerful each level was. Linley was unable to give an accurate accounting of his own power. Beirut hurriedly explained, Linley, there is a great difference in power between sovereigns of different levels. For example, a lesser sovereign paragon, compared to an intermediate sovereign who had fused 5 profound mysteries, is slightly weaker. But they will be fairly close. A similar example, an intermediate sovereign paragon will have power that is fairly close to a chief sovereign who has fused 5 profound mysteries. But of course, he would still be slightly weaker. This is without taking weapons and innate divine abilities into account. I understand now. Linley nodded slightly. Lesser sovereign paragons were comparable to intermediate sovereigns with 5 profound mysteries. In terms of profound mysteries, lesser sovereign paragons were more than 10 times as powerful as intermediate sovereigns. But despite that, they still weren't superior to intermediate sovereigns. This represented that the increase in the power of will was more than tenfold. In addition, as far as will went, lesser sovereign paragons didn't just possess the power of sovereign's will, they also possessed the portion of will which the universe had bestowed upon them when they had become paragons. Despite that, however, the power of their will was still more than 10 times weaker than the will of an intermediate sovereign. Then, a normal lesser sovereign, compared to an intermediate sovereign, should only have 100th the amount of will within his sovereign spark. Logically speaking, Beirut laughed, Linley, since you already had the power of will from your 4-way soul mutation, and have now fused 2 sovereign sparks, the power of your will should be on a higher level. You should now have a will which is comparable to an intermediate sovereign's. Bluefire looked at Linley, puzzled. Linley, you are a soul mutate. After fusing the two sovereign sparks, is the will within them able to join together as well? No, Linley shook his head. The power of a sovereign's will is almost all within the spark. How can they possibly fuse? Grandpa Beirut's guess is accurate. Linley nodded. After fusing this water-type sovereign spark, my 5 souls gained in will yet again. According to my calculations, simply in terms of will alone, I should be comparable to an intermediate sovereign. But you also have fused sovereign power. Beirut laughed. Right. The two types of sovereign power can indeed fuse. Linley sensed that greenish-gray sovereign power flooding torrentially through his body. He nodded. This fused sovereign power, in terms of strength, should be 10 times more powerful than ordinary sovereign power. Now, in terms of will and sovereign power, I should be comparable to intermediate sovereigns. If it had been someone else, even though he might have 2 sovereign clones, that just meant he had an additional sovereign body, and that each soul would have an additional, separate boost in will. But Linley didn't just receive an additional boost in will, more importantly, his sovereign power could be fused. And you have an Overgod artifact. Bluefire smiled. With an Overgod artifact, you should be comparable to the 6 ordinary chief sovereigns. Linley knew which 6 individuals Bluefire was referring to. Of the 11 chief sovereigns, only 5 had Overgod artifacts. The 18th floor of the Necropolis of the Gods. Whoosh! A gentle wind blew. Beirut, in an excellent mood, waved his sleeve. Instantly, with a kriayak, the many bluestone tiles began to move, and the platform which held the corpse of the azure dragon once more sank down. At the same time, a table and 4 stone seats appeared on the bluestone floor as well. Everyone, let's sit down and chat. Beirut chortled as he led everyone to be seated. At the same time, he withdrew some fine wine and food from his interspatial ring. 10,000 years. I've never been so happy as I am today. Haha, I never even imagined that the one who would lead me to escape from my predicament would be that kid from the Fenley Kingdom. In the blink of an eye, that Magus Institute student would become someone comparable to a chief sovereign. I'm amazing, right? BB said smugly. I immediately recognized how great the boss was and followed him. Immediately recognized. Linley said with a smirk. Back then, I baited you. I lured you in with roasted hare meat and roasted chickens. BB was astonished. Haha, Bluefire, seeing the look on BB's face, couldn't help but laugh as he drank his wine. Come, Linley. Cheers. In the future, whether or not Bluefire and I will be able to fearlessly depart the Yulon Plain will all be up to you. Beirut laughed. Linley hosted his cup as well. Don't worry, Grandpa Beirut. However, it is only proper for me to do these things. It was you who gave me these 2 sovereign sparks. In the end, you are the one extricating yourself from your difficulties. I need to thank you. Linley said with sincerity. Beirut laughed, then shook his head. Haha, you are too modest. I was going to have to find sovereign candidates anyhow. And where else could I possibly find a candidate like an expert who is a 4-way soul mutate? This had nothing to do with me, it was all you. Originally, Bluefire and I continuously paid attention to you. When the soul stone that was keeping you alive was used up, we originally thought that you wouldn't be able to survive for much longer. Who would have thought that you descended from the precipice of danger and managed to return? You survived your journey to the borders of death. Beirut sighed in praise. Linley didn't quibble any further. He just happily laughed with the people around him. However, my comprehension of the profound mysteries of the laws is still too low. Linley said with a frown. In terms of the profound mysteries, Linley had still only fused 4 of them. The other sovereigns had fused at least 5. Don't be impatient. The nearby blue fire laughed calmly. Linley, given your level of innate talent and the fact that you fused 4 profound mysteries in just a few thousand years, and with that boundless amount of faith energy, I imagine that in a short period of time, you will reach an extremely high level of insight. However, Linley, let me warn you of something. I recommend that you develop towards material attacks. Why do you say that? Linley was somewhat surprised. Your body is very strong. Blue Fire sighed. I've heard from Beirut that your body is now comparable to a sovereign artifact. You must understand that even amongst sovereigns, the number who are at this level can be counted on one hand. Oh. Linley was rather surprised. Is it very hard for sovereigns to strengthen their bodies? Based on what I know, the ancestor of our Azure Dragon clan, the Azure Dragon, had a body that was as strong as a sovereign artifact. Blue Fire snickered. The Azure Dragon? Do you think that ordinary sovereigns can be compared to the 4 divine beasts, those freaks of nature? Linley didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. The 4 divine beasts were freaks of nature? But Bluefire's words weren't wrong either. Not only did all 4 of the 4 divine beasts possess excessively powerful innate divine abilities, they were even able to fuse their 4 innate divine abilities into one. This was simply too monstrous. Linley, look at me. I'm a sovereign as well. However, I'm only able to use my sovereign power to manifest my body. I'm not able to further strengthen it. Blue Fire shook his head. For my true body to be as strong as a sovereign artifact? That's something incredible that you have to be born with. For example, the 4 divine beasts, Beirut, the chief sovereign of destruction, or the chief sovereign of death. That is true for all of them. The nearby BB called out in surprise, the chief sovereigns of death and destruction aren't humans. They aren't humans. Beirut nodded. The chief sovereign of death was supposedly the very first living creature which was created when the netherworld was born. When the netherworld was first created, the netherworld continent didn't have any living creatures within it. Deep within the vast, endless, boundless nether sea, the very first living creature was given life, a type of plant. That is the true form of the chief sovereign of death. Plant? What type of plant? Linley was a bit curious. That's not very clear. Beirut shook his head. Nobody has ever been able to force the chief sovereign of death to show her true form. Supposedly, the abyssal fruit tree that lives in the abyssal mountain was once the fruit tree partner of the chief sovereign of death. Oh. Linley suddenly understood. Linley suddenly thought back to the diagrams that had appeared on the robes of the chief sovereign of death. Those tendrils and vines, and that coiling silver serpent. The abyssal fruit tree and the chief sovereign of death are both plants. As for that pair of giant gold and silver snakes, they should have been 2 creatures that lived atop those 2 plants. There is a limit to how much sovereign power can strengthen one's body. Blue Fire laughed calmly. My fused sovereign power is unable to further strengthen my body either. Linley said with a frown. When he had first fused 4 types of high god power and created his fused divine power, he was able to dramatically strengthen his body and also strengthen his divine artifacts and Godspark weapons. But the power of his fused sovereign power, in terms of strengthening effectiveness, was inferior to his 4-way fused divine power. It must be understood that the power of his 4-way fused divine power was more than 10 times greater than ordinary sovereign power. As for Linley's fused sovereign power, it was also more than 10 times greater than ordinary sovereign power. Compared to his earlier 4-way fusion of divine power, there wasn't much of an increase. Although in terms of attack power, there was almost no difference. In terms of having special effects, it was inferior to his fused divine power. It seems finding a balance is important. The energy of my 4 bodies is now unbalanced. Linley could guess at the reason why. Linley, your body is as strong as Beirut's and the 4 divine beasts. You have to make use of it. Bluefire said solemnly. If you develop your material attacks, then even at your current level, you will be able to compete against ordinary chief sovereigns. However, I'm still not a match for the chief sovereign of light. Linley shook his head. The chief sovereign of light had an Overgod artifact as well. Let's not be impatient. Let's take everything slowly. Beirut laughed calmly. You are a soul mutate. Once you successfully fuse 4 types of profound mysteries from different laws, the power will be 10 times greater than when you fuse 6 types of profound mysteries of the same law. By then, you will definitely surpass the chief sovereign of light, Augusta. Linley's potential, in terms of the laws, was far higher than that of an ordinary sovereign. The moonlight was like water, flowing across the boundless earth. Within Dragonblood Castle, Linley and Delia were lying against each other in bed. This was the 3rd night after Linley had become a sovereign. The previous day, Linley had returned to Dragonblood Castle and had described everything to Delia. Delia had been stunned. She had never imagined that Linley could reach such a level. Just by relying on his Overgod weapon, Linley was now already comparable to a chief sovereign. If he was able to gain greater insights into the profound mysteries, he even had a chance at surpassing the chief sovereign of light. Linley, you've become a sovereign. I feel like I am in a dream. Delia rested against Linley's chest and spoke softly, her gaze passing through the window and staring towards the outside. Sovereign, unfortunately, I wasn't able to bring Grandpa Douring back to life. Linley sighed to himself. Delia turned her head to look towards Linley, smiling encouragingly. If Grandpa Douring was alive, he would be very happy for you. In addition, life, death, age, infirmity, Grandpa Douring lived a very long life. Don't be too sad. Forget it. Enough of this subject. Linley shook his head. Everything is wonderful now. Delia smiled. There will no longer be any more storms of blood. You won't even leave the Yulon Plain. Let's just live a peaceful life. We'll watch the sun rise, then watch the sun set, for 1,000, for 10,000 years. Hearing this, Linley couldn't help but gently pull Delia into his arms. Linley knew that his future life would indeed be very peaceful. But of course, even during peaceful times, Linley still needed to train. As time flowed on, his power would continue to grow, to the point where he would catch up to the chief sovereign of light. The chief sovereign of light, I must defeat him and even kill him. Linley said to himself silently. After all, his mother's freedom was still under the domination of the chief sovereign of light. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 7, Dragonblood Continent. Within the Yulon Plain, there was no one whatsoever who could kill Linley. No longer under any pressure, his life naturally was quite carefree. More than 300 years quietly passed in this peaceful manner. 300 plus years was an extremely long period of time for mortals. During this period of time, countless mortals had died, and countless more had been born. Dragonblood Castle, however, stood virtually unchanged. In the world of deities, the passage of 1,000 years was naught but a twinkling. Linley, your mood seems to be excellent today. Delia was taking a walk with Linley through their rear flower gardens. Today, I made a slight breakthrough in my training. Linley smiled. Oh? You fused 3 types of profound mysteries from different laws. Delia said in surprised delight. No, not that quickly. Linley shook his head and laughed. The throbbing pulse of the world, circular softness, dimensional attack, although I've trained to the last part of fusing these 3, I've reached a bottleneck. This final bottleneck will be very hard to break through. The more profound mysteries were involved in a bottleneck, the harder it would be to break through. For example, the bottleneck for fusing 6 profound mysteries. How many experts had become stuck there, unable to become paragons? Then what sort of breakthrough do you mean? Delia said, puzzled. It was in the profound mysteries of explosion, of the laws of fire. Explosion is very hard to fuse, but today, I managed to fuse it with the throbbing pulse of the world. Linley said with a calm laugh. However, I must say, I trained much more slowly during the past 300 years than I had thought I would. After all, after becoming a sovereign, he had an ocean of faith energy to support him. His visualization and comprehension speed was definitely far faster than in the past. These past 300 years were probably comparable to nearly 10,000 years, pre-sovereign. No rush. Your time is unlimited. Delia said with a calm laugh. You are in no rush, but what about Grandpa Beirut and Blue Fire? Linley suddenly stared into a gate of the rear flower garden. He saw a short-haired youth laugh while walking over. This youth seemed 60%-70% similar to Linley in terms of looks. It was Linley's son, Wade. Father. Mother. Wade laughed. Today is a day of a grand celebration for our Dragon Blood continent. Aren't you going to go? Dragon Blood continent. Linley was startled, but then he laughed and said self-mockingly, I forgot that today is the day of the Dragon Blood festival. Shortly after Linley became a sovereign, he had a conversation with Beirut and Blue Fire. When they just so happened to discuss the Yulan continent and the Blue Fire continent, Linley, in a fit of excitement, created a continent of his own, the Dragon Blood continent. These three large continents formed a perfect triangle. Back then, Linley had even exerted his sovereign power and made it so that the small islands around the Yulan continent and the Blue Fire continent were all moved within the Dragon Blood continent. The population of the denizens of the islands, all combined, was close to 10 million. In addition, Linley also moved many magical beasts and other living creatures over. During these 300 years, because of the vastness of the continent, and because the magical beasts had been released by Linley into the western part of the Dragon Blood continent, the humans here faced no natural enemies. In 300 short years, the human population thus exploded from 10 million to over 100 million. But of course, during these 3 centuries of development, the Barak Empire had provided a great amount of assistance, such as through the sea trade between the two continents. Although it was described as trade, in reality, they were providing assistance. The people who had been moved over to the Dragon Blood continent had decided upon September 24th as the day of the Dragon Blood festival. Linley, the citizens of the Dragon Blood continent all worship you. They treat you as a true divinity. Can it be that you aren't even going to go take a look at their Dragon Blood festival? Delia laughed with pursed lips. Although the population is just over 100 million, which isn't that much, the size of the Dragon Blood continent is somewhat larger than the other 2 continents. This sort of non-stop rate of growth will make it so that in a few thousand years, the population here will surpass that of the Blue Fire continent. Father, quite a few people in our clan are going over. Wade laughed as well. Fine, we'll take a look. The Yulan continent. The Blue Fire continent. The Dragon Blood continent. The distance between these 3 continents, to ordinary mortals, was fairly significant. But to deities, or even to saints, they were fairly close. There was only a distance of roughly 5,000 kilometers of ocean between each of the 3 continents. Linley and Delia, in the blink of an eye, left the Yulan continent and arrived at the Dragon Blood continent. The number 1 city of the Dragon Blood continent, Barak City. This city shared the same name as the imperial capital of the Barak Empire. This city was close to the eastern ceiling of the Dragon Blood continent, and was also the closest city to the Yulan continent. Because it bordered the sea, it developed very quickly. This number 1 city had flourished, developing into an extremely large city with millions of citizens. Today was the Dragon Blood festival, and so Barak City was extremely lively. Large numbers of countryside dwellers had also flocked to the cities, wanting to partake in the festivities. It wasn't just the plazas in front of the temples, even the streets of the city were filled with oceans of people. Linley, dressed in an azure robe, and Delia, dressed in a white robe. They were walking through the crowded streets. Although the streets were crowded, nobody touched Linley and Delia. In fact, nobody even noticed this odd occurrence. This place is becoming more and more crowded. There weren't this many shops the last time I came. Linley laughed calmly. Last time you came was more than 2 years ago. Delia said. 2 years? That was just a short while ago. Linley's current mentality had already begun to change. Right. When are you going to make your own divine plane? Delia asked, puzzled. Last time, Grandpa Beirut said that the process of creating a divine plane involves joining your soul with the plane that you are creating. You will gain a clear sense of the laws, which will be beneficial to you, increasing your power. Aren't you at a bottleneck, right now? Why not try it? Every single sovereign had the power to create their own divine planes. Upon doing so, they would also gain insight into a portion of the laws. For example, a water-type sovereign who created a divine plane would end up creating a water-type divine plane. During the creation process, they would gain insights into some of the laws of water that were involved in the creation of this plane. Creating the plane once, or creating it 100 times, would involve the exact same portion of the laws. There would be no differences. In addition, creating a divine plane exhausted a great deal of spiritual energy, sovereign power, and time. Thus, generally speaking, sovereigns would only create a single plane. The creation of a divine plane isn't something which can be completed in just a year or two. Based on Grandpa Beirut's experience, it will require nearly 2,000 years. Linley said with a sigh. A plane was simply too vast. Even sovereigns would need to spend significant amounts of time creating one. Beirut had created one, but Bluefire had not. This was because Bluefire had already become a paragon. He had a thorough understanding of the profound mysteries of the laws of fire. Even if he created a divine plane, he wouldn't benefit much. 1,000 years is, indeed, quite long. Delia nodded. When, then, do you plan to go create your divine plane? Soon, after making some preparations. Linley said with a laugh. Like Grandpa Beirut, I will create a plane next to the Yulan plane. While chatting, Linley and Delia reached the wide plaza of the main temple of Barrack City. The plaza before the main temple had a circumference of tens of thousands of meters, and it was currently filled with a thronging horde of people who stood there. Right in front of the plaza was the Holy Emperor of the Dragon Blood continent, who was preaching. In the name of the Almighty True Divinity, Linley. A sonorous voice echoed in the air above the temple, and instantly, everyone in the plaza before the tunnel fell silent. Countless worshipful eyes stared ardently towards the Holy Emperor. The charismatic power of a religious sect truly is astonishing. Linley himself truly did not know whether to laugh or to cry. Previously, he had created the Dragon Blood continent and moved so many little islands over. Afterwards, he had allowed the descendants of his Barrack clan to take responsibility for everything else. This so-called church and whatnot. It had all been developed by the descendants of the Barrack clan. However, Linley was indeed qualified to be worshipped like this. After all, Linley was already comparable to a chief sovereign. In addition, it was extremely easy to spread his religion, because something like the creation of a continent, in the eyes of mortals, was completely inconceivable. It was an almighty miracle, in fact, and it was countless times more formidable than the angelic descent miracles that the former Radiant Church had been capable of. Linley, the Dragon Blood Festival is about to reach its most fevered state. Delia laughed. Just like before. During each Dragon Blood Festival, here in the Dragon Blood continent, we will select 100 elites to be sent to the Yulan continent. These 100 elites will join the earlier elites and be trained, with some being weeded out. Those who fulfill the qualifications will be permitted to join the Divine Guard of the Holy Land, Dragon Blood Castle. An armored, bearded man who stood by the side of the Holy Emperor spoke out in a clear voice. Now, let the selection tournament begin. Seeing this, Linley couldn't help but laugh awkwardly. It was Taylor who came up with this thing. Delia laughed as well. Dragonblood Castle was where Linley lived. That place had many high gods, and demigods. It was definitely the place in the Yulon continent with the most deities. Even the guards of Dragonblood Castle had become known as the Divine Guard. If you wanted to join the Divine Guard, you would have to participate in the frenzied competitions. After all, if one had the chance to interact with deities, one might easily be greatly benefited or be given tutelage. Occasionally, a divine artifact, a divine spark, or a golden soul pearl would be released from Dragonblood Castle. Dragonblood Castle was definitely a place which was far more attractive than any institute. The selection process for the Divine Guard is far more strict than the student selection process of the former Ernst Institute. Linley let out a sigh. Back then, we were sent to the institute in batches of 100. Although this selection process also results in 100 candidates, it requires everyone to gather in the Yulon continent and spend tens of years in the training and elimination process. It must be understood that the members of the Divine Guard of Dragonblood Castle would only be changed once every century. Candidates, however, were selected every year. Countless people would go berserk for this chance. Actually, there is no need to change the Divine Guard at all, Delia said with a sigh. All members of the Divine Guard are experts of the 9th rank, with lifespans of nearly 5 centuries. They can absolutely stay in the Guard for 2 or 3 centuries. Joining the Divine Guard is, after all, the fastest way to become a saint. Linley said with a calm laugh. That group of people living within Dragonblood Castle is completely made up of deities. Although quite a few became deities through using divine sparks, given the understanding they have regarding the profound mysteries, if they can provide just a bit of guidance, those members of the Divine Guard might become saints. Linley lifted an eyebrow. What is it? Delia asked, puzzled. Someone came to the Yulon plain. Linley laughed. One of ours. In the distant north of the Yulon plain. The Arctic ice cap. The teleportation array at the top of that mountain of ice. A blurry light was glowing, and 4 figures slowly emerged. Greetings to the 4 of you, milords. The current planar overseer of the Yulon plain, although still a god, had been changed to a beautiful golden-haired woman. The leader of the 4 gave her a glance. Let's go. The 4 figures rose into the skies, flying towards the south. Elder brother, do you think the words of the chief sovereign of destruction are true or false? The only woman amongst the 4, a lady with long, fiery red hair, spoke out. This person was the matriarch of the Vermilion Bird clan of the 4 Divine Beasts clan. Consider the chief sovereign of destruction's status. How could he possibly deceive us? The White Tiger Patriarch laughed as he spoke. That's not it? Only, I still can't believe it. The Vermilion Bird Matriarch said hurriedly. Not just you, even I find it hard to believe. Gislason let out a sigh. But the chief sovereign of destruction can't possibly be lying. But, Linley, a sovereign? This is too enough talk. Whether he is or isn't a sovereign, soon we shall know. The deep voice of the Black Tortoise Patriarch rang out. Have you found Linley through your divine sense yet? The Vermilion Bird Matriarch said, puzzled. I've searched all 3 continents, but have found no trace of Linley. I have, however, found quite a few of his family and friends. I can't find him either. Can it be that Linley truly has become a sovereign? Gislason and the other 3 looked at each other, all still feeling bewildered. This news was simply too astonishing, after all. Otherwise, the 4 clan leaders wouldn't have hastened all the way to the Yulon plain. The 4 clan leaders all moved extremely quickly, and they soon arrived within the borders of the Yulon continent. There are many experts in the castle up ahead, and quite a few are descendants of my clan. That should be Dragon Blood Castle, Gislason said, and then the four transformed into four blurs, streaking towards Dragon Blood Castle. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 8, Entreaty. Dragon Blood Castle was guarded very strictly. Multiple patrol squads roved about, the weakest of the guards at the 9th rank. Saints could be seen everywhere. But these guards weren't able to detect the arrival of Gislason and the other three at all. Within the rear courtyard of Dragon Blood Castle. A quiet field. Rustle, the leaves of the trees swayed in the wind. Beneath a thick, gnarled tree, a grey-robed Olivier was currently seated quietly in the meditative position, his eyes focused ahead of himself. Next to his body hovered an energy sword which constantly flashed about, displaying one type of attack after another. Two swirls of black and white energy could be vaguely seen. Suddenly, Olivier raised his head, discovering that four people were standing shoulder to shoulder nearby. Lord Patriarch. Olivier was shocked. He hurriedly rose to his feet. Olivier, I just came to ask you a question. Gislason smiled as he spoke. Do you know where Linley is? Prior to this, before Gislason's group of four had descended upon the estate, they had searched Dragon Blood Castle with their divine sense. They had discovered quite a few people, but the first person they had come to see was Olivier. Linley. He should have gone to the Dragon Blood continent. Olivier guessed. Milords. A voice suddenly rang out. Gislason's group of four couldn't help but turn to look, only to see a maid arrive from the doorway. The maid said respectfully, the lord of the castle has ordered me to invite the four of you, milords, to the rear gardens. Lord of the castle. Gislason's group of four was stunned. The lord of the castle is Linley. Olivier immediately explained. Over the course of countless years, although managers had come and gone, the position of lord of the castle was forever Linley's. The vermilion bird matriarch's eyes lit up. She was rather stunned. Linley is in Dragon Blood Castle. It seems the chief sovereign of destruction's information was accurate. The white-robed white tiger patriarch took a deep breath as he spoke. Linley was in Dragon Blood Castle, but they weren't able to locate him with their divine sense. Linley had definitely surpassed the deity level. Then, he must be a sovereign. The four clan leaders of the four divine beasts clan followed the maid towards the rear gardens. The four felt very complicated feelings in their hearts. They also felt very nervous. After all, Linley's status was now different. Sovereigns and deities were on completely different levels. Sovereigns were lofty individuals who stared down at the countless life forms who struggled and battled across the countless planes. The planar wars could only be considered a game for sovereigns. Deities, even paragons, felt powerless in the face of sovereigns. Four clan leaders, come in. A clear voice rang in from the rear gardens. It is Linley. Gislason's group of four looked at each other, then entered the rear gardens. The rear gardens took up a fairly wide amount of space. Gislason's group entered, then glanced around themselves. Only now did they see that far away, in the center of the garden, stood Linley. Linley was currently drinking wine with Delia and laughing and chatting. Noticing their arrival, Linley turned his head to glance at them, then laughed calmly, "Four clan leaders, please be seated." After his four-way soul mutation, Linley's status had risen to far surpass that of the four clan leaders within the four divine beasts clan. And now, Linley was a lofty, noble sovereign. He is right in front of me, but I feel as though there is nothing there. Gislason sent to the other three. It is like when I saw Father in the past. Rather than any of their awe-inspiring sovereign's presence, they would completely contract their auras. Gislason no longer had any doubts by now. Sovereign. He really is a sovereign. The eyes of the other three clan leaders lit up. Gislason looked at Linley, then immediately bowed. Sovereign, we. As Gislason saw it, in terms of relationships, Linley wasn't that close to them. First of all, Linley had only joined the Four Divine Beasts clan later in life, and secondly, there had been members of the Four Divine Beasts clan who had desired to seize Linley's coiling dragon ring. Although afterwards, they had done better, that was because of Linley's power and because of Beirut's status. But now that Linley was a sovereign, deities and sovereigns, the difference between them was like that between the earth and the heavens. There was an unbridgeable gap between them. Naturally, they had to be respectful. For clan leaders, no need to address me as sovereign. Linley interrupted these words, then laughed calmly. Just act as we previously did. You can just address me as Linley. The four exchanged glances. I am quite curious. How did you know that I became a sovereign? Linley laughed calmly as he asked the question. How had news that he had become a sovereign in the Yulon Plain spread to the infernal realm? The nearby vermilion bird matriarch laughed beautifully, bowing slightly in order to show her respect. Linley, the news that you had become a sovereign was actually given to us by the chief sovereign of destruction. At first, we couldn't believe it. After the four of us discussed the matter, we decided to go to the Yulon Plain to investigate. Now, it seems, this really is the case. Although Linley chatted and jested with them, the four clan leaders still unconsciously felt pressure. After all, no matter how much Linley contracted his aura, the four clan leaders still knew, subconsciously, that Linley was a sovereign. The chief sovereign of destruction. Linley frowned. How did the chief sovereign of destruction know? The nearby Delia said, puzzled. Logically speaking, he shouldn't. After all, this happened in the Yulon Plain. Linley said with a frown. There's one other possibility. Grandpa Beirut chatted with the chief sovereign of destruction. Beirut was on fairly good terms with the chief sovereign of destruction, and Beirut also had a clone remaining in the infernal realm. But Linley still felt puzzled. What sort of status does the chief sovereign of destruction have? Even if he knew, why would he tell the Four Divine Beasts clan? Linley turned to stare at Gislason, puzzled. Patriarch. Why did the chief sovereign of destruction tell you these things? The chief sovereign of destruction's energy clone descended upon the Skirite Mountains. Gislason explained. In addition, he requested that our Four Divine Beasts clan loan him 100 high gods, who he would return to us sometime later. Since he was borrowing our people, he explained that as compensation, he would bestow us with some sovereign's might and give us some guidance. He said that if we wanted to know why the four ancestors died, to ask you, Linley. Linley was stunned. The cause of the deaths of the four ancestors? The big fellow nearby, the Black Tortoise Patriarch, said in a booming voice. We immediately asked, why ask Linley? The chief sovereign of destruction then said, you have reached the sovereign level in power. So that's how it is. Linley nodded slightly. What did he borrow people for? Unclear. Gislason stared at Linley, then went straight to the heart of it. Linley, we have come for two reasons. First, to investigate if you had truly become a sovereign. Second, we wish to know why our four ancestors died. Linley. Given that you are a member of clan, please tell us. The four clan leaders all looked expectantly towards Linley. The downfall of the Four Divine Beasts had caused the downfall of the Four Divine Beasts clan. Even in their dreams, the Four Divine Beasts clan dreamed of learning who had done it, and of the true cause of death of the four ancestors. Linley frowned. He hesitated a moment, then nodded. Very well. I will tell you. Because of certain reasons, the four ancestors had engaged in a battle against the chief sovereign of light. The chief sovereign of light. The eyes of Gislason and the other three lit up. A battle between sovereigns causes tremendous shockwaves in a wide area. They battled all the way into chaotic space. The four ancestors fled while fighting, and the chief sovereign of light chased and attacked. Afterwards, the four ancestors executed their supreme technique, their fused innate divine abilities. The chief sovereign of light, however, managed to survive it and not die. With their most powerful attack having failed, the four ancestors lost their will to battle. The chief sovereign of light, however, seized the opportunity to rely on his Overgod artifact to kill them in succession. By relying on his greater speed, he was able to kill all of the four ancestors. Linley spoke calmly, but the bodies of Gislason and the other three trembled as they listened. The chief sovereign of light. Gislason's eyes were already filled with faint tears. How could the chief sovereign of light have resisted the attack? The vermilion bird matriarch actually shook her head. Impossible. When my mother was alive, she said that not even amongst chief sovereigns, the ones who could withstand their supreme attack could be counted on one hand. The chief sovereign of light wasn't one of them. But the reality is that the chief sovereign of light managed to resist it. Linley sighed. Gislason and the other three couldn't accept it? After all, the four divine beasts were their parents. Linley, Gislason hesitated momentarily, then suddenly spoke out. HRM. Linley looked at him. Gislason looked at the other three, then turned to look towards Linley. Linley, I want to ask, did you use the sovereign sparks of the four ancestors to become a sovereign? If one wished to become a sovereign, there was only one way, to fuse with the sovereign spark. However, there were only a total of 77 sovereign sparks. Only after one sovereign died would another be born. Linley gave the four of them a glance. Yes. Linley nodded. The sovereign spark, how? The vermilion bird matriarch opened her mouth and said a few words, but then hesitated. Shouldn't the chief sovereign of light have acquired the four sovereign sparks? How did you acquire it? In addition, there should have been four of the sovereign sparks. You used one. There are still. Gislason looked towards Linley. Linley smiled slightly. He could guess that most likely, the four clan leaders also wanted to acquire the sovereign sparks. Perhaps in the eyes of the four clan leaders, the four sovereign sparks were their inheritance from their parents, it was rightfully theirs. Only, they couldn't say it, nor did they have the courage to say such things. But Linley didn't feel the same way. The 77 sovereign sparks had descended from the heavens when the universe had been created. The powerful would be able to fight over and acquire them. The four divine beasts had relied on themselves to acquire these sovereign sparks. Beirut had relied on his own courage and had risked his life to seize these four sovereign sparks. If the sovereign sparks had fallen into the hands of the chief sovereign of light, how could he have given me one? Linley said calmly. I'll tell you the truth. Beirut, in the past, risked his own life to acquire these four sovereign sparks. And now, all of the four sovereign sparks have been used up and fused. Beirut. The four were stunned. He was able to take them away from the chief sovereign of light. The vermilion bird matriarch said, stunned. Despite their words, upon hearing Linley say that the four sovereign sparks had all been used up, the four clan leaders still felt a bit disappointed. They didn't dare to say anything else, however. You don't need to harbor any suspicions regarding this. Linley laughed calmly. Linley. Gislason said solemnly. There is one more thing we must beg of you, Linley. Speak. Linley glanced at him. Gislason took a deep breath, then said solemnly, Linley, the four ancestors were the ancestors of our four divine beasts clan. Our four divine beasts clan can't just be silent and pretend that we know nothing of their deaths. The four ancestors were killed by the chief sovereign of light. We hope that you, Linley, I only say if in the future, you have the ability or the chance to do so, please avenge our four ancestors. Linley. The vermilion bird matriarch said hurriedly as well. We know that this request is a bit excessive, but at this point, you are our only hope. Please. The big fellow, the black tortoise patriarch, stared at Linley as well. Linley looked at the four clan leaders. He could feel the sincerity of their entreaties. "I promise you." Linley nodded solemnly. "If I'm able to do it, I won't show any mercy." "Thank you," the four said gratefully. "You must be tired after rushing all the way here. Rest at my place for some time first. Afterwards, we'll have a banquet, then we'll talk." Linley laughed calmly. "That's fine as well." Gislazen's group of four didn't try to stay any longer. They immediately allowed themselves to be led away by a distant maid, and they departed the flower garden. Linley turned his head to look at the nearby Delia. "Delia, you step back for a time as well. I need to chat with Beirut about something." "Fine." Delia laughed, nodded, and left the flower garden. Moments later, two figures descended from the heavens and arrived next to Linley. It was Beirut and Blue Fire. The three immediately sat down around the table. "Haha, the four clan leaders of the four divine beasts clan came." Beirut laughed as he spoke. "They've discovered that you are a sovereign, eh?" "They have. It was the chief sovereign of destruction who told them," Linley said. "The chief sovereign of destruction?" Blue Fire was rather puzzled. "Right. It's actually quite odd. The chief sovereign of destruction actually went to the four divine beasts clan to borrow 100 high gods. I don't know why," Linley said. Beirut, upon hearing this, couldn't help but frown. He said in a reflective voice, "Most likely, the chief sovereign of destruction's experiments have reached the final stage." Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 9, The Next 5,000 Years. Experiments. Linley instantly recollected how the chief sovereign of destruction had acquired more than half of the blood essence of the four divine beasts from Beirut. The source of a divine beast's power comes from his blood essence. Beirut shook his head. However, executing an innate divine ability requires not just the lineage, but also the soul. The uniqueness of a soul, however, stems from the bloodline as well. Linley frowned. "It is precisely because the members of my clan have the lineage of a divine beast, that they all have unique souls as well. In addition, I've absorbed a drop of blood essence as well. This allowed the strength of my innate divine ability to increase substantially." "That is because you are a descendant of the four divine beasts clan." Beirut laughed calmly. "All right, enough discussion of the chief sovereign of destruction and whether or not he has finished researching the supreme technique of the four divine beasts. That doesn't have much to do with the two of us. Our greatest target is the chief sovereign of light, Augusta. Our enemy isn't the chief sovereign of destruction." Blue Fire laughed as well. "The chief sovereign of destruction? The power of any of the four chief sovereigns of the edicts is unfathomable." Beirut let out a sigh. "Grandpa Beirut, which one is the most powerful, do you think?" Linley was very curious regarding the four chief sovereigns of the edicts as well. "That's quite hard to say. In terms of will, it should be the chief sovereign of fate," Beirut said with a frown. "However, the Overgod artifact which the chief sovereign of fate wields is a soul-protecting Overgod artifact. It isn't a weapon, and so in terms of attack power, he's probably a bit weaker than the other three chief sovereigns of the edicts." Linley was surprised. He hadn't chosen a weapon-type Overgod artifact? The chief sovereign of fate really was quite unique. The chief sovereign of fate never gets involved in worldly matters, and is always focused on developing various supreme techniques. Most likely, he feels that he doesn't need any Overgod weapons, that he is already strong enough. Beirut laughed calmly. "Now, the chief sovereign of destruction is developing a supreme technique based on the blood essences of the four divine beasts. Right, Linley, you are a member of the Azure Dragon clan as well. Perhaps you will be able to develop something from the blood essences of the four divine beasts." As he spoke, Beirut waved his hand and produced 4 little azure flasks. These 4 flasks each contain 81 drops of blood essences from the four divine beasts. Beirut said. This is roughly a quarter of the total amount of blood essence the four divine beasts had. Blood essences was the distilled essence of blood. Even creatures as enormous as divine beasts would have, at most, 300 or so drops, which was already quite astonishing. Every single drop contained a terrifying amount of energy. If that hadn't been the case, Linley wouldn't have been able to, after using a single drop, strengthen his body so greatly that he would resist the attacks of an average 7-star fiend. Grandpa Beirut, Linley was a bit surprised. I originally gave the Chief Sovereign of Destruction half, and I used up some in my own experiments. Only 100 or so drops are remaining. You can take these 4 flasks of 81 drops each. I hope that you, too, can develop the supreme technique of the 4 divine beasts. Given your spiritual energy, if you are able to develop it, you'd have a chance at challenging even the chief sovereigns of the 4 edicts. Beirut laughed. The 4 divine beasts, when combining their power as lesser sovereigns, were able to unite their power into a fused innate divine ability that could threaten even chief sovereigns. Linley's fundamentals were much superior, compared to that of the 4 divine beasts. All right. I'll accept it. But I am not confident in being able to develop a supreme technique. Linley said, but in his heart, Linley still felt a bit of anticipation. Perhaps he would be able to develop one. Linley, how is your training progressing? Beirut asked. Infusing 3 different profound mysteries of different laws, I'm only one step away. But this breakthrough truly is difficult. Linley shook his head and laughed helplessly. How about this? Beirut laughed, then said encouragingly, as I see it, you'd best hurry up and go establish your own divine plane. The process of establishing a divine plane will cause you to gain insights into many things. Establishing a divine plane will take a very long period of time. You might make some major breakthroughs. Bluefire laughed as well. After all, Linley had only been training for 3 centuries after becoming a sovereign. It would take a tremendous amount of time to establish each divine plane. It definitely will take a very long period of time, because I plan to simultaneously establish 2 divine planes. Linley smiled. 2 divine planes. Beirut and Bluefire were both startled. The 4 clan leaders of the 4 divine beasts clan stayed at Dragonblood Castle for several months. And then, after once more entreating Linley to take revenge if he could, they left the Yulon Plain and went back to the Infernal Realm. As for Linley himself, he said a few things to Delia and Bibi, then went to establish a divine plane. He left behind his original body, which focused on analyzing the blood essences of the 4 divine beasts. Linley's original body was the physically strongest body out of the 5, and it also contained the lineage of the Azure Dragon. Thus, it was quite appropriate to rely on his original body to do the research. As for Linley's 4 powerful clones, they left the Yulon Plain and headed towards chaotic space. Within the vast, endless void of chaotic space, the streams of chaotic energy swirled and exploded as beautifully as fireworks. Linley himself stood there within the chaotic streams. A few thousand kilometers away from Linley was the Yulon Plain. Linley, to simultaneously establish 2 different divine planes is something which has never been done before. Beirut chortled. We are definitely going to have to watch and learn. I've never even established a divine plane. Bluefire laughed as well. Although the 3 were quite relaxed, Beirut and Bluefire both sent out their sovereign sense, so that if any enemies drew near, they would instantly know and be able to flee into the Yulon Plain. All right. I'm preparing to begin. Linley's body suddenly divided into 2. An earthen yellow-robed Linley and a blue-robed Linley now stood shoulder to shoulder. These were 2 of his divine clones, his earth clone and his water clone. Seeing this, both Beirut and Bluefire fell silent as they quietly watched this. Rumble, a stream of earthen yellow liquid began to swirl around Linley's divine earth clone, while at the same time, a stream of blue liquid began to swirl around Linley's divine water clone. As time moved forward, the two streams of liquid grew thicker and thicker as the amount of sovereign power grew greater and greater. The power to create a divine plane was something which the heavens had bestowed upon sovereigns. Everyone who had fused with the sovereign spark and had become a sovereign knew that as long as they activated a hint of the laws contained within their sovereign sparks, they would be able to create a divine plane. This sort of divine ability wasn't something one could gain through training, it was inherent to a sovereign spark. Which was to say, it was bestowed by the heavens. The creation process didn't require the sovereign to ponder bitterly and tiresomely, the sovereign only needed to have his soul be completely occupied by pondering the creation process. The creation of a single divine plane was the same as a session of meditating. It would result in insights. Different attribute sovereign sparks would naturally be different. Linley possessed two sovereign sparks, thus, he decided simultaneously establish two divine planes. At this moment, Linley's two sovereign bodies were more than 1,000 kilometers apart from each other. The creation of a divine plane truly is exhausting. The process of collecting enough sovereign power alone will take up centuries. Linley sighed mentally. At present, the streams of energy that were swirling around Linley's divine clones had already turned into two vast, thick, rivers of water. It was as though two titanic pythons of water that were 10,000 meters long were swirling around them. Linley finally stirred. After centuries had passed, he had finally collected enough sovereign power from the elemental sea. Rumble. Simultaneously and suddenly, the two enormous pythons of earthen yellow liquid and green liquid suddenly contracted, instantly transforming into two giant spheres of liquid that completely surrounded each of Linley's two divine clones. The two giant globes of water trembled, the powerful energy contained within them causing the surrounding space to constantly shatter. Fortunately, this was chaotic space, there wouldn't be much damage caused. Bang! After compressing to a certain limit, the two water globes suddenly exploded. Whoosh! Instantly, enormous special tears that were 1,000,000 kilometers long were created. The power of this explosion was simply too great, it was absolutely stunning. But of course, this was because too much sovereign power had been built up, the true power of this, if unleashed on a lesser sovereign, would at most injure them. Explosions rang out unabated in the void, and spatial tears stretched off into the distance, with no end in sight. The earthen yellow globe had exploded towards the right side, as it spewed forth its contents. The green globe had exploded towards the left side, as it spewed forth its contents. Rumble, earth elemental essences and water elemental essences suddenly began to gather. The exploding surges of sovereign power were like generals, each bit of sovereign power was able to control trillions of elemental essence particles. In the blink of an eye, within a range of more than 100 million kilometers of the explosion, a large amount of sovereign power began to take over the vast amounts of elemental essences in this area, and a miraculous, profound change began to occur. The sovereign power stretched to 100 million kilometers in scope, and the elemental essences stretched to billions of kilometers. These are, the profound mysteries of vitality. And the profound mysteries of gravitational space are included as well? So vitality and gravitational space can actually fuse in such a perfect manner. Illusory fog and ice edge and water body are able to fuse together so perfectly, merging into space? Utterly inconceivable. While establishing these two divine planes, the process involved quite a few profound mysteries of the laws of the earth and the laws of water, as well as miraculous ways of using them. Linley gaped, stupefied. His soul was completely merged with the divine plane he was creating, and they thus contained the imprint of his soul. Naturally, he would sense everything which was happening with complete clarity. One insight after another flowed towards him like the endless waters of a flood. Linley was completely shocked and speechless. He couldn't help but be completely lost in them. Ryip, a spatial tear from the Yulon plane formed, and two figures charged out. It was Beirut and Blue Fire. Linley has already been creating these two divine planes for 1,300 years. Why isn't he done yet? Beirut said, rather puzzled. He is simultaneously creating these two divine planes. He should be more or less finished by now. Perhaps there is something special about the divine planes he is making. Bluefire said. The two of them looked carefully at the two large divine planes that were directly ahead of them. The divine planes had already begun to take rough shape. What? Beirut was greatly shocked. This Linley, Bluefire was stunned as well. As they had looked at the two divine planes, they naturally discovered what was special about them. These two divine planes, actually intersected. Has Linley gone insane? Beirut said frantically. Within that 10,000 kilometer region of intersection between those two planes, he's actually fused two types of sovereign power, and two types of elemental essences, this. Indeed. After spending roughly 1,000 years, Linley had already created the two divine planes, and only needed to do some finishing touches. But right at this moment, Linley's soul was stirred. And he actually began to use his fused sovereign power to form a small plane that was only 10,000 kilometers in size, at the empty space between the two planes. This plane was a plane of fused sovereign power. After having sensed and watched the two previous divine planes be born, this time, Linley wanted to rely on his own power to give it a try. But who would have imagined? Previously, he had completely depended on the methods imprinted into his sovereign spark, making the creation process simple. Now, however, it was very hard, as he was relying completely on himself to create this plane that was merely 10,000 kilometers in size. In the past 300 years, Linley had solved one complicated problem after another regarding how to more perfectly use his two types of sovereign power to control two different types of elemental essences. Acting according to a blueprint was easy, but creating from scratch was very hard. The two sovereign sparks only contained methods for creating a divine plane of earth and a divine plane of water. They held no information on the creation of a fused divine plane. Linley thus had to borrow and test various methods and come up with his own ways based on his own insights in order to build this place. But this meant that he made repeated mistakes that he would have to correct. Naturally, he would gain insights as well. Although Linley was technically creating a fused divine plane, in reality, Linley was training. It's been 3,000 years. Linley actually still has yet to complete that fused divine plane. Beirut and Bluefire looked at each other, not knowing whether to laugh or to cry. The current Linley was completely absorbed in his work. He had no sense of the passage of time at all. His current goal was to come up with any measures necessary to perfect and complete this fused divine plane of merely 10,000 kilometers. Within the fused divine plane, one side was filled with water that reached the heavens, while the other side was filled with towering mountains. Linley hovered in the air above. Ha ha, Linley laughed so hard, his eyes turned into slits. He finally let out a breath of relief. I finally succeeded. Linley stretched his senses out slightly, and immediately knew how much time had passed. I only spent 1,000 years creating those two divine planes, but I spent 4,000 years creating this fused divine plane. Linley felt quite moved. This time, Linley had, amazingly, spent 5,000 years of time. Given how fast sovereigns trained, 5,000 years was indeed enough to make astonishing improvements. But Linley, absorbed in his high-difficulty work, had gained astonishing insights during the past 5,000 years. I didn't imagine that over the course of creating the divine planes, I would end up finishing my fifth fusion of the profound mysteries of the laws of the earth. I've even fused 4 profound mysteries of the laws of water. Linley didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. All of his new insights had come because he wanted to create his own fused divine plane, and so it was normal that he had some accomplishments in the laws of the earth and the laws of water. But of course, in the past 5,000 years, Linley's greatest gains were still in his insights into fusing the profound mysteries of different laws. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 10, Sword Intent. Earth, Fire, Water, Wind. 4 Laws. The 4 profound mysteries that Linley had chosen from them were, respectively, the throbbing pulse of the world, the profound mysteries of explosion, the profound mysteries of circular softness, dimensional attack. Of the 4, the hardest to fuse was the profound mysteries of explosion. During the past 5,000 years, Linley had gotten a deeper and deeper understanding of the laws of earth and laws of water. This had made it so that Linley had, long ago, completely fused the throbbing pulse of the world, dimensional attack, and the profound mysteries of circular softness into one. As for the profound mysteries of explosion, it had reached a bottleneck in its fusion with the dimensional attack. Once the fusion was completed, then only the final step would remain, completely fusing all 4 of the profound mysteries into one. Rumble, waves struck against the slopes of the mountains. Linley hovered there in midair. Now, I have 2 steps to go. The first is to completely fuse the profound mysteries of explosion with dimensional attack. Then, I need to completely fuse the 4 together into a whole. By then, with 4 profound mysteries all fused together, the power of the attack will be so great that surpassing Augusta will be simple. And then, Linley took a breath to calm himself as he stared around himself. There was not, however, any sun in this world of 10,000 kilometers. Linley raised his head, then said a single word. Light. Instantly, with sovereign power serving as the core, countless particles of elemental essences began to gather. They frantically compressed, and then formed a dazzling sphere that hung high in the sky, a sun. The sun hung high in the skies, wantonly releasing light which illuminated the entire plane. With but a thought, Linley willed a membrane to form around this sun, protecting it. Normally, it will constantly draw in elemental essence, and afterwards, it will release it in the form of sunlight in a perpetual cycle. Linley smiled calmly, and then used the technique upon the other side of the plane, creating a moon. Within this plane, the sun and the moon swiveled around the plane in a constant rotation. When the sun dropped beneath the edges of the plane and reached the backside of it, the moon would just so happen to rise. Everything has been completed. Linley looked at his surroundings. There was the earth, the mountains, the seas, but no life. However, Linley wasn't capable of creating new life. At most, he would be able to bring some living creatures from other places to this place. Crackle! A giant spatial tear appeared in the distant skies, and 2 figures flew in. One was a black-robed Beirut, while the other was a white-robed Blue Fire. The 2 were clearly rather surprised and curious. "Ha, Linley, although this fused divine plane of yours is a bit small, in terms of its spatial stability, it has actually surpassed the 7 divine planes and is close to the 4 higher planes." Beirut waved his hand, chopping out a spatial tier, then evaluated, and in this place, both earth and water are fairly dense in terms of elemental essences. Linley let out a resigned chuckle. "Don't make fun of me. I spent more than 4,000 years, but was only able to make such a tiny plane. We aren't making fun of you." Blue Fire looked at the surrounding area, then laughed. "We can create planes, but alas, we cannot create new life. The creation of new life is not a domain which we sovereigns can interfere in." Beirut laughed calmly, then looked towards Linley. Rather expectantly, he said, "Linley, you have spent 5,000 years here. Given your training speed, especially after becoming a sovereign with 2 sovereign bodies, I imagine that you now train at least 100 times faster than before you were a sovereign. In the past 5,000 years, how has your training progressed?" Bluefire's eyes lit up as well as he looked eagerly towards Linley. "I've fused 5 profound mysteries of the laws of the earth, and 4 of the laws of water." Linley sighed with a frown. "However, I'm still somewhat lacking when it comes to fusing 4 different laws. The further I go in my training, the harder it becomes. I imagine that in order for me to truly master the fusion of these four laws, it will take me anywhere from a few thousand years to an indeterminate amount of time. Beirut and Bluefire exchanged a glance. Linley's progression was what they had expected it to be. After all, 5,000 years of training as a sovereign was definitely comparable to 500,000 years of training as a high god. The three sovereigns just stood there in the newborn fused divine plane, laughing and chatting. "Linley, when are you returning to the Yulon plane?" Beirut suddenly asked. "I'm in no rush. My original body is still in Dragon Blood Castle, so I don't need to hurry back. I'm preparing to develop what will be my most powerful attack to date." Linley laughed calmly. "Now that my understanding in the profound mysteries of the laws has increased, my previous supreme attack, Microcosm, is no longer suitable." "Makes sense." Beirut and Bluefire both nodded. "Then we will wait for you in the Yulon plane." "Haha, after you finish developing it, you have to show it off to us." Beirut chortled, and then he and Bluefire both left as well. To develop a technique that suited oneself wouldn't take too long. Generally speaking, 10 days or so would be enough. Earth, fire, water, wind. These four laws had a total of 27 profound mysteries. To select the four most appropriate profound mysteries out of them was extremely difficult. However, given Linley's level of understanding regarding them, and the fact that he had decided to develop towards material attacks, he had chosen the throbbing pulse of the world, explosion, circular softness, and dimensional attack. Amongst them, throbbing pulse of the world, explosion, and dimensional attack were exceedingly, terrifyingly powerful attack-focused profound mysteries. To fuse them together by force was virtually impossible. Thus, Linley had selected circular softness to serve as the chain which allowed the other three profound mysteries to perfectly fuse together. According to Linley's plan, if he selected the most attack-focused aspects of the four laws and bound them together, the power should definitely reach an inconceivable level. Within the void, chaotic energy streamed everywhere, forming countless comets that streaked about in a bewildering, beautiful manner. Linley stood there within the void, holding Mirage in his hands. He would occasionally shut his eyes and ponder, and then occasionally wave his hands to test out his attacks. Every single test caused space to crumble. Although I've already fused 3 profound mysteries. With the 4th profound mystery of explosion not yet being fused in, that's fine. Explosion will simply make it so that the power of my attack will gather together at one point, then instantly blast out. If countless streams of energy could be focused onto one point, how powerful would that attack become? Just as Linley continued to perfect his technique, a light suddenly flashed in his mind. A sword. Linley's eyes lit up. My spiritual energy is far more powerful than that of an ordinary sovereign's. Why don't I infuse a spiritual attack into the attack? When I strike out with my sword, I will simultaneously launch a material attack and a soul attack. Intrigued, he immediately began the 16th day of research in the void. After countless setbacks and improvements and reconfigurations, he had continuously perfected his technique, to the point where Linley was now unable to perfect it any further. He had finally created his most powerful, supreme technique. I've finally perfected it. However, the material attack and soul attack both require me to use all my power to control it. It seems that I will need to use 2 souls to separately control each aspect. Both the soul attack and the material attack were supreme techniques. Using either of the attacks would force Linley to be completely focused and unable to be distracted. Thus, his only choice was to have 2 of his souls separately control each technique. It is time to test my most powerful attack. With a smile, Linley waved his hand. Mirage vanished, and what appeared was the Life Overgod sword. Holding the Life Overgod sword in his hand, he stared with a sharp gaze towards the void in the distance. Fused sovereign power filled the Life Overgod sword, and instantly, a terrifying aura spread out. Ryeyeyeyeyeyep. Countless streams of chaotic energy in the void shattered, as countless spatial tears appeared in the surrounding area. Even before the life Overgod sword had struck out, its power could already be felt. Rumble. The sword moved. It was like a jade-green bolt of lightning that slashed out. The tip of the life Overgod sword emitted countless rays of sharp sword energy, tearing open countless spatial fractures that extended as far as the eye could see. It seemed as though countless giant dragons were coiling about. The countless spatial fractures affected and pulled at each other as well, instantly causing large regions of space in the void to collapse. The collapsed region was roughly 100 meters wide, but in length, it was more than 1,000,000 kilometers. Apocalypse. When this attack was unleashed, more than just countless rays of sword energy shot out. Actually, a tiny, unremarkable, translucent sword shadow that was just the size of a palm shot out as well. Sadly, I wasn't able to add explosion into the fusion as well, and so strike zone of the sword is actually 100 meters wide. If I could focus it into a single line, then that would be true perfection. Linley evaluated. But although he said this, a smile was evident on his face, showing that Linley was quite satisfied with himself. This attack simultaneously contained a soul attack and a material attack. Since it simultaneously contains two different types of attacks, then I'll name it, Sword Intent. Sword Intent. It truly was a sword intent. The sword was the material attack, while the intent was the soul attack. I really look forward to the day when I completely, perfectly fuse all four profound mysteries. What level of power will the sword intent attack of mine reach? Linley turned and took a simple step, passing through 1,000 kilometers of space to enter the divine plane he had created. There was, after all, interdimensional portals that linked Linley's divine plane of earth and divine plane of water to the Yulon plane. He passed through the interdimensional portal and arrived at the Yulon plane. The Yulon plane. Dragon Blood Castle. Dried leaves had been blown everywhere by the wind. It was late autumn. 5,000 years had passed, and the marks of history had been left upon each tree, each tile, and each stone within Dragon Blood Castle. Beneath an ancient tree with a trunk that was so large, 10 men would be needed to link hands around it. Linley, Beirut, and Blue Fire were gathered. These three sovereigns had, quite naturally, formed into a little team. Grandpa Beirut, what did you say? Linley was greatly shocked. We should head out. Right. Beirut smiled, then nodded. But at my current level of power, I'm not confident in my ability to fight against the chief sovereign of light. Linley said hurriedly. Augusta had an Overgod artifact as well, after all. When you were creating your divine planes and training, Blue Fire and I discussed this matter carefully. Beirut laughed. You are trying to fuse 4 different types of profound mysteries from different laws. This will be even harder than becoming a paragon in a single type of law. Although you have made great improvements in the past 5,000 years, I'm worried that even if you spend another 5,000 years, you probably won't make any more major improvements. Linley fell silent. Fusing 4 profound mysteries from different laws. The power was tremendous, but so too was the difficulty level. The difficulty level was, in fact, greater than that of becoming a paragon in one law. Thus, we decided to do something else. Blue Fire joined in. To do what? Linley frowned as he looked towards Blue Fire and Beirut. You are a fusion sovereign. Beirut smiled. In addition, you have 4 bodies. Currently, you have only fused 2 sovereign sparks. In reality, your potential has yet to be truly unleashed. Our plan is to leave the Yulon plane and hunt down a sovereign. We will let you fuse with yet another sovereign spark. Linley couldn't help but feel shocked. Blue Fire nodded as well as he looked at Linley. Given your power, after you fuse with another sovereign spark, your strength will completely eclipse that of an ordinary chief sovereign. It will even surpass the chief sovereign of light's power. Beirut's gaze was scorching. By then, the three sovereigns of our Yulon plane will naturally be able to live carefree lives amongst the world of sovereigns. Won't killing sovereigns attract the wrath of other sovereigns, who might even stop us? Linley frowned. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 11, Hunt and Kill, A Storm Brews. To hunt and kill a sovereign, then fuse with his divine spark. To Linley, a four-way soul mutate, this was indeed a possible avenue for increasing his power. Attract the wrath of other sovereigns who would stop us. Beirut paused momentarily, then nodded and said, naturally, there is a pact between the sovereigns. If a chief sovereign was to fight a lesser sovereign, that would be a slaughter. Thus, if anyone violate the pact, the four chief sovereigns of the edicts will join forces to punish them. Linley's heart clenched. The chief sovereigns of the four edicts jointly punish them. It seems as though the Overgods don't care about fratricide amongst sovereigns. Linley suddenly said. The nearby blue fire laughed calmly. The Overgods are only the edicts. They are only responsible for making sure that the countless planes of the universe function normally. They won't care about the deaths of the sovereigns. If a sovereign dies, there will definitely be another sovereign born. The main issue is that the sovereigns themselves worried that if this sort of internal slaughter was to occur, the universe would be too chaotic. Thus, they came together in agreement on a pact. What does this pact entail? Linley immediately asked. Beirut laughed calmly. The pact is simple. There are three ranks of sovereigns. If a lower rank sovereign did not antagonize a higher rank sovereign, the higher rank sovereign is not permitted to slaughter the lower rank sovereign. Only sovereigns at the same ranks are able to battle each other. This point was decided upon jointly by the chief sovereigns of the four edicts. So only sovereigns of the same level of power are permitted to fight each other. Linley nodded to himself. If that's the case, then doesn't that mean the chief sovereigns of the four edicts are permitted to easily slaughter the other chief sovereigns? Haha, Beirut couldn't help but laugh. Linley, are you an idiot? The chief sovereigns can fight against each other, yes, and the chief sovereigns of the four edicts have Overgod artifacts that suit their nature, true. But just because they have powerful weapons doesn't mean that their speed is greater than that of the other chief sovereigns. If the other chief sovereigns aren't able to overcome them, can't they run? Oh. Right. Right. Linley said, embarrassed. Sovereigns of the same rank generally wouldn't be too different from each other in terms of speed, especially since they would be able to discover the enemy from far away through their sovereign sense. But in the past, Augusta killed the four divine beasts. Doesn't this count as violating the pact? Linley couldn't help but say, puzzled. I told you that only sovereigns of the same level of power were permitted to fight each other. This pointed towards people at the same level of power. What matters is actual power. Beirut said. The four divine beasts, although all lesser sovereigns, were comparable to a chief sovereign when working together. How could they be treated as lesser sovereigns? Wouldn't that allow them to massacre all of the lesser sovereigns? Linley understood now. The four divine beasts had been placed on the level of chief sovereigns in power. Linley. In terms of power, you, too, are at the chief sovereign level. Beirut laughed insidiously. However, nobody knows. We can go hunt and kill one sovereign, and you can fuse the sovereign spark. By then, even if the other sovereigns find you, you can just find an excuse for what you did. That shouldn't be too hard. Linley was moved, and he laughed. I understand. Others didn't know the secret of him being a soul mutate, and thus it shouldn't be too hard for him to make something up. In addition, the chief sovereign of destruction is on fairly close terms with us. He will help speak on our behalf. Beirut laughed calmly. As I recall, the chief sovereign of death is on fairly good terms with you as well, Linley. The pact was decided upon jointly by the four chief sovereigns of the edicts. Given that the chief sovereigns of destruction and death were on good terms with Linley's side, this matter naturally wouldn't prove problematic. Hunt and kill a sovereign. Who should we hunt and kill? Linley suddenly asked. Linley. You should still require a wind-type sovereign spark and a fire-type sovereign spark, right? Is it better to have a lesser sovereign spark or an intermediate sovereign spark, or even a high sovereign spark? Beirut asked instead. Clearly, Beirut understood the principles of balance, which was why he asked. Linley nodded and said, lesser sovereign spark. When he fused 4 types of divine power, although divine power was much weaker than sovereign power, because of the balance of the fusion, the 4-way fusion of divine power was actually 10 times more powerful than sovereign power. In addition, it also strengthened the body, strengthened artifacts, and had other miraculous effects. It wasn't necessarily true that the stronger the sovereign spark, the better. What mattered more was balance. Very well. We shall now go kill either a wind element lesser sovereign or a fire element lesser sovereign. Beirut paused momentarily, then said, amongst the sovereigns, the one whom we are on the worst terms with is the sovereign of wind, Terracia. Originally, when I acquired the 4 sovereign sparks, after I went to the infernal realm, Terracia tried to threaten me. Terracia. Linley nodded. In the infernal realm, if it hadn't been for the blood-rich sovereign appearing, Terracia might nearly have killed Linley for the sake of the 9 soul pearls. In addition, in the void of chaotic space, if it hadn't been for Beirut and Blue Fire successively blocking Terracia, on that occasion as well, Linley probably wouldn't have been able to bring the Overgod talisman back to the Yulon plane. Terracia has acted against me multiple times and wanted to kill me. In addition, there lies an old grudge between Terracia and yourself, Grandpa Beirut. Linley nodded. Then, let's make him the one. Terracia is a mere lesser sovereign, and yet he has quite a bit of ambition. Blue Fire nodded as well. He deserves death. The 3 sovereigns of the Yulon plane, in just a few moments, had determined the fate of a different sovereign. 3 days later, Linley bid his family and friends farewell. As for the target of this mission, to hunt and kill a sovereign, Linley only told Delia, Bibi, and a few others. Delia and the others had all been stunned at the decision of Linley and the other 2, but Delia and Bibi were filled with sufficient confidence towards Linley, Beirut, and Blue Fire. Boss, your actions will determine if I'll be able to roam about and adventure in the various planes in the future. Bibi pursed his lips and laughed. Just wait and watch. Linley laughed loudly. Linley, be careful. Delia warned. Right. Linley gently squeezed Delia's hands, then turned and left. This mission, according to their plans, wouldn't take too long. Linley said a few more words to his family and friends, then left alongside Beirut and Blue Fire. The Yulon Plain. The vast, endless North Sea region. Linley, Beirut, and Blue Fire were currently flying leisurely to the north. The 3 weren't in the slightest rush at all. Linley. Have you gained anything from your 5,000 years of analyzing the blood essences of the 4 divine beasts? Beirut asked. Not much. Linley shook his head and laughed. Because Gates and his 4 brothers at Dragon Blood Castle are of the Black Tortoise lineage, through them, I've gained a bit of understanding as to how one should unleash the power of the blood essence of the Black Tortoise. I am also now able to hypothesize at the mechanism by which the ancestor of my Azure Dragon clan, the Azure Dragon, was able to strengthen his body. The Azure Dragon's body strengthening mechanism was borrowed from the Black Tortoise's transformation. However, my body is already sufficiently powerful. After absorbing part of the blood essences of the 4 ancestors, it would just rise slightly in power by 1 level. Linley laughed calmly. At his level, further strengthening his body was simply too difficult. As for the supreme innate divine ability of the 4 divine beasts, I was unable to develop any insights into it. Linley sighed. After all, I never saw the 4 divine beasts unleash their innate divine abilities. In addition, my understanding and insights regarding the soul were shallow to begin with. Haha, don't be discouraged. I've been researching for much longer than you, and I've even seen the 4 divine beasts unleash their attacks. I also have a deep level of understanding regarding the soul. And yet, I'm still unable to understand it. Beirut laughed calmly. To be able to strengthen your body yet another time is something worth being happy over. Unfortunately, those blood essences aren't able to strengthen me. The reason why they were useful for Linley was because Linley was a member of the Azure Dragon clan to begin with. Grandpa Beirut, Blue Fire. Linley suddenly smiled in mysterious manner. The two looked at Linley, puzzled. Just now, I used my divine sense to scan both of you 12 times. Did you notice anything? Linley laughed as he looked at them. Just then, Linley had intentionally scanned Beirut and Blue Fire with his divine sense, but Beirut and Blue Fire hadn't noticed anything. They had continued to chat with him normally. What? You scanned us with divine sense? Beirut and Blue Fire exchanged glances, shocked. Right. Linley nodded. Beirut and Blue Fire were truly stunned. It must be understood that sovereigns were able to sense it when another sovereign scanned them. Even if a chief sovereign were to scan a lesser sovereign, the lesser sovereign would still sense it. This was because all sovereigns, regardless of their level, used sovereign power as the source of their spiritual energy. Sovereign power was all at the same level. Differences in the power of their will would cause slight differences in power, which would result in different scopes and ranges for their senses. But speaking on a qualitative level, sovereign senses were all the same. Perhaps it is because I used my fused sovereign power to unleash my divine sense. Linley laughed. Fused sovereign power was a full level stronger than ordinary sovereign power. For him to be able to scan other sovereigns without them noticing was what he had expected. It was much like how, in the planar battlefield, when Linley was merely a deity, the post-mutation Linley could send out his divine sense without other paragons being able to notice anything. Haha, this is wonderful. Beirut was overjoyed. Linley. With this being the case, even if you discover other sovereigns through your divine sense, other sovereigns wouldn't realize that they were being scanned. Now, even if we want to act against Terracia will have no idea that we are scanning him. Right. Linley was very happy as well. The strength of his divine sense, this was one of the superiorities of his fused sovereign power. Beirut said jubilantly, originally, I was worried that Terracia would flee upon seeing us, and so I was planning for us to travel separately and surround him. But now, it seems, there is no need for that at all. Haha, let's go. Blue Fire laughed clearly. Let's prepare to go to the Divine Wind Plane. Let's head out. Beirut and Linley both laughed as well as they flew towards the teleportation array. The 3 sovereigns of the Yulan Plane, this was the first time that they had left the Yulan Plane as sovereigns. Given that they were going to act against Terracia, Beirut naturally had begun to track Terracia's movements early on. Through the Blood Ridge Sovereign, Beirut had learned that Terracia had, 5,000 years ago, already returned to the Divine Wind Plane. The Divine Wind Plane had been jointly created long ago by the 7 sovereigns of wind. It was vast and endless. In terms of how many deities they possessed, the 7 divine planes weren't too far off from the 4 higher planes, the figures were similarly astonishing. Countless deities filled the 9 continents of the Divine Wind Plane, and each day, many deities would die, and many new geniuses would suddenly gain insights and make breakthroughs. For the sake of survival, fight. For the sake of glory, fight. Countless deities were struggling and battling across the 9 continents of the Divine Wind Plane. As for the sovereigns, they were far above it all. It was like watching countless ants struggle and battle. The sovereigns laughed as they watched the various battles. As they saw it, this was just a game. Occasionally, they might choose an emissary and intervene in the games. the Divine Wind Plain. Kinja Island. The silver-haired, hawk-nosed man, Teresia, was standing in front of a beach, staring into the endless sea. Teresia was a very ambitious person. For the sake of growing more powerful, he was willing to do anything. He had originally been a surpassing talent of the Dylan Plain Dilun. A true genius, he had easily become a deity, and then had come to the netherworld, one of the higher planes, and engaged in constant battles and struggles until he had become a powerful high god. Back then, the 77 sovereign sparks had been scattered across the 4 higher planes. For the sake of the sovereign sparks, countless experts had perished in miserable ways over the course of the struggles. He had seized a sovereign spark and had become a sovereign of wind. After becoming a sovereign, by relying on the power of faith energy, he had broken through the final barrier and stepped into the realm of Paragon. He had never before been defeated. He had always been very self-confident. Even after becoming a sovereign, Teresia had never given up increasing his strength still further. At his current level, there were only 3 ways by which he could increase his strength. The first was to acquire an Overgod artifact. The second was to fuse with yet another sovereign spark, so as to have another sovereign clone. The third was to make it so that the Divine Wind Plane would win 10 consecutive victories in the planar wars. What's going on today? I keep on having a restless feeling in my heart. Teresia frowned, his narrow, slitted eyes looking about him, his gaze like daggers. Unconsciously, Teresia decided to stretch out his divine sense, and in an instant, it covered the entire Divine Wind Plane. And as it just so happened, less than 100 million kilometers away from him, there were 3 figures that were flying over at high speed. A black-robed Beirut, a white-robed, crimson-browed Blue Fire, and a sky-blue-robed Linley. The 3 sovereigns were flying shoulder to shoulder. Beirut, Linley, and that sovereign of fire. Teresia's face completely changed. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 12, The First Display of Power. Although he was shocked, Teresia then only let out a cold laugh. He sent out through divine sense, "Ha, Beirut, Linley, and that crimson-browed fellow. What, the 3 of you actually dare to leave the Yulon Plain? Do you now have something up your sleeve that allows you to go dare battle the chief sovereign of light?" Teresia wasn't afraid at all. He knew that Beirut had, in total, 4 sovereign sparks. The 3 in front of him were merely lesser sovereigns. He, Teresia, was a lesser sovereign of wind. Sovereigns of wind were skilled in speed to begin with, and he was also a paragon. Amongst lesser sovereigns, it could be said that there was no one who was faster than him. The only one amongst these 3 who is comparable to me in speed is that sovereign of fire. Teresia was absolutely confident. If they join forces, they are indeed stronger than me. Unfortunately, if I want to escape, they won't possibly be able to catch me. With this self-confidence, Teresia was naturally in no rush to flee right away. The chief sovereign of light? Naturally, we fear him. Beirut smirked, then sent back with a laugh. However, you aren't the chief sovereign of light. Teresia laughed coldly. At the same time, Teresia sent his divine sense to the number 1 expert of the Divine Wind Plane, the chief sovereign of wind. Chief sovereign, Beirut is leading 2 lesser sovereigns and charging towards me. From the looks of it, they harbor ill intentions. Sovereigns flew at a speed that was hundreds of times faster than paragons. Even in a place as vast as in the infernal realm, sovereigns could traverse the plane in half a day. From this, one could imagine how fast they were. 100 million kilometers. To Linley's group of 3 sovereigns, less than 5 minutes would be necessary. Linley, Teresia seems quite confident. Blue Fire chortled as he spoke mentally. He actually isn't fleeing. There is no one amongst lesser sovereigns who exceeds him in speed. Linley sent back. However, that was in the past. Now that you, a fusion sovereign, have appeared, you have destroyed all the previous rules. If Teresia had immediately fled, there might be hope for him. But now, there won't be enough time for him. Beirut chortled as well. Clearly, they all felt as though they could already see Teresia's end. Right at this moment. Beirut, why have the three of you come here? A cold, icy voice rang out in the minds of Beirut and the other two. Lord Dia. Beirut immediately sent back. Linley was intrigued. The speaker should have been the chief sovereign of Wind, Dia. According to legend, the chief sovereign of Wind, Dia, was a divine beast, a jade-winged gold lighthawk. Jade-winged gold lighthawks were wind-type divine beasts that were born with tremendous innate speed. After becoming the chief sovereign of Wind, his speed had reached a truly monstrous level. Those who had been able to acquire the 11 high sovereign sparks in the past were all tremendously powerful. The likes of the chief sovereigns of death and destruction were born with tremendous, incomparable power. Others were comparable to paragons as soon as they became high gods. The 11 chief sovereigns all had their own unique strengths. Beirut, you are also one of my sovereigns of Wind. That cold voice rang out. I don't wish for internal warfare to begin amongst my sovereigns of Wind. Mr. Dia. Linley sent back. Teresia tried to act against me on multiple occasions. Back then, if it hadn't been for Grandpa Beirut and Bluefire, I probably would have died. This time, I have come for revenge. I am only a lesser sovereign as well. I trust that this doesn't violate the pact between sovereigns. The chief sovereign of Wind, Dia, hesitated momentarily, but then sent back with anger, Linley. You have just recently become a sovereign. You had best act more properly and in accordance with the rules. This is the divine wind plane. I am the master here. Apologies. Linley sent back with a smile, and then he stopped paying attention to the angered rebukes that the chief sovereign of Wind, Dia, was delivering. Beirut sent to Linley, we are still 2 million kilometers away from Teresia. We should arrive soon. Teresia truly is bold. Linley swept his gaze forward. Atop an island mountain. Teresia's slitted gaze turned cold, and he cursed softly, Beirut's group of 3 is truly insane. Although they won't be able to catch me, I can't just wait here for them to attack. Humph. I'll first let them be smug for a period of time. Soon, the news that they have appeared in the divine wind plane will definitely make its way to the chief sovereign of light. By then, it'd be strange if Augusta didn't come. When the two were 1 million kilometers away from each other, Teresia finally fled. Swoosh. A ray of light shot towards the southeast at high speed. The speed at which it moved vastly surpassed the pursuing speed of Linley's group. Linley and Bluefire, after all, had to accommodate Beirut, who was the slowest of the 3. Haha, Teresia, so you aren't a fool after all. Beirut sent with a smirk and a laugh. Humph, Beirut, you can be smug for now. In a short while, you won't even have the chance to cry. Teresia replied disdainfully. Linley and the other 2, in hot pursuit, exchanged a glance. Beirut sent mentally, it's about time. Linley, time to move. Linley, we'll just watch from over here. Bluefire sent as well, laughing. Don't worry. Linley was completely confident, and his speed suddenly increased. Right at this moment. How can this be? Teresia's face changed. Linley is even faster than me? But I'm a paragon, right, he's a paragon as well. But how could he be so fast? Teresia pondered momentarily, but then he guessed at a possibility. Can it be? Beirut, you madman, you let Linley fuse both of the sovereign sparks by himself. Teresia was now truly frantic. Generally speaking, if a sovereign was to fuse with 2 sovereign sparks, even though the sovereign wouldn't be able to use fused sovereign power, the sovereign soul would gain another portion of will. He was a paragon to begin with, given that he has fused with an additional sovereign spark, he definitely is a bit stronger than me. Teresia was now panicked. He fled at high speed towards the southeast. There was a teleportation array in the continent to the southeast, and by traveling through it, he would be able to flee at high speed. However, they were still more than 1 billion kilometers away from the teleportation array. Linley, however, was only 1 million kilometers away from him. In addition, the distance of 1 million kilometers was rapidly shrinking. By the time Teresia had flown an additional 10 million kilometers, Linley had already appeared within his line of sight. Chief Sovereign. Teresia sent frantically. Linley, you want to kill a sovereign in my divine wind plane. The chief sovereign of wind, Dia, said angrily. Linley just sent 2 words back. I apologize. And then, not slowing down at all, he continued the pursuit. In reality, Linley was still hiding the majority of his true power. If he were to use his fused sovereign power, his speed would be much faster. Beirut is insane, and this Linley is also insane. Teresia could tell that he wasn't going to make it. He let out a low curse, and then slashed one hand backwards. Crackle, an enormous tear in space appeared, and Teresia immediately charged into the spatial rift. Linley immediately charged straight into the exact same spatial rift. From this, one can imagine how close the two were to each other. Beirut and Blue Fire, seeing this through their divine senses, shared a laugh. Let's go take a look as well. Beirut chuckled as he slashed open a spatial rift, then entered chaotic space alongside Blue Fire. Within the void of chaotic space, they were able to effortlessly find Linley and Teresia through divine sense. Within the void, countless flows of energy of random colors fluctuated randomly. At the moment, one sovereign was in pursuit, while the other was fleeing. Linley, don't go too far. Teresia bellowed angrily through divine sense. What, you've forgotten how far you went in the past? Linley snickered. If it hadn't been for the blood-rich sovereign and the others, Linley probably would have died long ago. Even now, Linley was just toying with Teresia. He had only revealed part of his power, but despite that, he was still able to have Teresia right where he wanted him. And yet, in the next instant, Linley instantly caught up to Teresia. Feeling a figure draw close to him from behind, Teresia grew frantic. So what if you fused with 2 sovereign sparks? I refuse to believe that you are much stronger than me. Teresia bellowed, and that enormous sickle appeared in his hands. He delivered a reverse-handed blow towards Linley. Silently, soundlessly, the sickle blade tore through the surrounding space. A lesser sovereign who was also a paragon was indeed terrifying. Faced with this heaven-shattering blade, Linley casually launched a chop backwards. World Breaker. Linley had fused 5 of the profound mysteries of the laws of the earth, and had developed quite a few techniques. Since he normally wished to hide his power, he naturally would end up using these techniques now. Clang. Rumble, the giant sickle in Teresia's hands trembled, then began to shatter, inch by inch. Teresia himself was knocked flying away by that wild explosion of power. A single blow from the sword had shattered a sovereign artifact? Ugh! Teresia was shaken so badly that he vomited out a mouthful of blood. This is impossible. Teresia stared at Linley in disbelief, and then his gaze locked upon the jade longsword in Linley's hand. That holy, sacred aura that emanated from the sword caused one's heart to tremble. Teresia instantly identified this weapon for what it truly was, and Teresia all but screeched, "Overgod weapon." And then, he stared at Linley in terror. Right. This is an Overgod weapon. Linley smiled as he looked at Teresia. Teresia stared at Linley in terror. He immediately said, I understand. It was you. You definitely acquired all 3 of the Overgod talismans. You accomplished the mission of the Overgod of life, which is why you received an Overgod artifact. Teresia had previously wanted to make a fight out of it, but upon seeing the Overgod artifact, he fell into despair. Even if they were equal in strength, the side that had an Overgod artifact would hold an absolute advantage. In his case, he was weaker than Linley to begin with. Linley, in the past, I was the one at fault. Now that you have acquired the Overgod artifact, I no longer pose a threat to you. Teresia now, finally, wanted to beg for mercy and ask for forgiveness. Linley, no need to waste words with him. Hurry up and eliminate him. Beirut's voice echoed in Linley's mind. Linley didn't hesitate at all. His face sank slightly, and the life Overgod sword in his hands shot out like a blur, stabbing straight towards Teresia. Bang! In the direction where the life Overgod sword was pointing towards, a spatial rift suddenly appeared that was only as thick as a fist, but which was infinitely long. As for Teresia's head, a small, fist-sized hole appeared within it. Laws of the Earth, World Disintegrator. Teresia's eyes were still filled with disbelief, shock, and rage. And then, he powerlessly toppled over and his sovereign artifacts fell out. Without the protection of his will and his sovereign armor, his corpse was instantly reduced to dust by the chaotic streams of energy. A semi-translucent jewel floated out, emanating a faint green light in every direction. A lesser sovereign spark of wind. I'd best fuse it right away. If I delay, other variables might come into play. Linley's expanded divine sense had already discovered that the chief sovereign of wind, Dia, along with other sovereigns of wind, had entered chaotic space. However, those sovereigns of wind were still quite far away from Linley. Those sovereigns had clearly discovered that Linley had just killed Teresia as well. Linley, the chief sovereign of wind, Dia, was angry now. Linley paid Dia no attention. He immediately made a drop of blood fly out from his finger, then dripped towards the wind-type sovereign spark. Linley, these sovereigns of wind were all rather angry now. He had killed a sovereign and was now about to fuse with his sovereign spark. This sort of behavior was simply going too far. Right at this moment, the chaotic energy flows around Linley began to change. A limitlessly dense gathering of wind elemental essences began to condense, and large amounts of green liquid began to manifest and swirl about Linley. In this moment, Linley had already changed into his divine wind clone, and the wind-type sovereign spark slowly sank into Linley's forehead. The fusing of a sovereign spark was extremely fast. Those sovereigns weren't able to stop it at all. Haha, Beirut and Blue Fire, who had already flown over, simply laughed. Previously, Linley was already comparable to a chief sovereign, thanks to his Overgod weapon. But now, after having refined another sovereign spark, Linley's power should have surpassed that of the chief sovereign of light. Beirut and Blue Fire were both incredibly happy. They now no longer feared even the chief sovereign of light. What, then, did they have to worry about? Finally, the three sovereigns of Yulon would no longer have to hide within the Yulon plane. Within the void. Just moments later, Linley, who had already fused with the wind-type sovereign spark, smiled and opened his eyes. Success. My will grew stronger yet again, and my fused sovereign power is now much more powerful. By now, Linley had already fused 3 types of sovereign sparks.